On the 21st of April 2013, I was called in to interrogate an unknown person of interest. I was briefed on a government flight from Chicago to some middle-of-nowhere town in Minnesota. The person that I was about to speak to was a mystery. There was no identification and there were no records of anybody like this person living anywhere near the location where they were found. None of the locals had ever seen them, and they hadn't been caught on any cameras. It's like they had appeared out of nowhere. What caught the interest of my employer was the fact that this person was found covered in blood, but were themselves unharmed. The moment I stepped off the tarmac, I had a suit next to me trying to give some context about recent developments. For the first 36 hours, he didn't say a word. The suit explained. They couldn't get him to focus on anything. Blood tests show he wasn't exposed to narcotics or toxins. Have you found the victims? Not yet, he sighed, but there seem to be multiple. We haven't gotten a DNA match on anything yet. They're double-checking the results. Something went wrong with the testing. All right, I said. Good start, but I need something to work with. The suit waved over a man with a briefcase and an umbrella. The air was damp and we were heading for rough weather. There were already little puddles on the asphalt. The suit kept the briefcase but handed me the umbrella. I sat down in the back of a small black sedan. The briefcase contained some early tests and observations. They had done some intelligence assessment, handing the stranger various puzzles. He passed with ease. Doctors figured he had been exposed to some kind of trauma, and that perhaps his odd behavior was a result of a dissociative episode. Why is he so interesting to begin with? I asked. I'm not seeing it. Oh, he was flagged by the DUC. Something about proximity to objects related to national security interests. What objects? No idea. So you don't know what makes him interesting? That's not my job, sir. We pulled up outside a small concrete building. Window slits shielded with rebar and bulletproof glass. If you didn't know about this place, you could never anticipate its location. It was just this gray spot in the middle of a verdant forest. A stark contrast to the pine trees brushing up against each other with the sway of the rising wind. And one more thing, the suit said as he leaned out of the passenger seat. We call him David. Why David? In the hospital, he just watched nature documentaries. David Attenborough, that kind of thing. It just caught on. Nature documentaries. That was something that I could work with. I went through a checkpoint, leaving my umbrella, ballpoint pen, cell phone, and identification. I was led down a corridor into an eggshell beige concrete room, one without a window slit. It was about 12 by 14 feet, but with a ceiling that reached almost 24 feet, where a single light hung overhead. I couldn't help but wonder how they had changed it. The door clanked open and I saw David for the first time. He was dressed in a white t-shirt and blue sweatpants, white socks, and blue Crocs. He had some marks on his wrists, indicating that he might have worn shackles until recently. But he surprised me. I had this picture of a raving lunatic in my mind with hair standing out in all directions. David was nothing like that. He was in his early 20s with a trimmed side part haircut, athletic, shaved, and not a hint of scars or scratches. This was someone I could see enter a boardroom. I couldn't imagine him running around naked in the forest. Have a seat, I said. David looked at me and shook his head. I do not want it. I mean, I would like you to sit down, I explained. Is that acceptable? Yes. He pulled out the chair and sat down across from me. I noticed his eyes shifting across the room as if looking for something. I was just about to ease him into a conversation when he spoke up. There are 20 fingers in this room. he said. Yes, there are, I agreed. Why do you say that? Establishing certainties, he explained. Undisputable facts. Is 20 fingers not a given since there are 2 of us? Statistically, the average person has less than 10 fingers. It is more common to lose a finger than to be born with multiple. That is true, I nodded. But with that reasoning, the average person has less than 2 eyes. Why bring up the fingers? It is more common to lose fingers. Probability, I said. Is that an interest of yours? And David didn't respond. He was counting something, watching the walls. According to what I had read in his files, David had only briefly spoken to others and usually about nonsensical things. But I got the impression that he was just thinking about things that we hadn't considered. His statements might seem random, but there was method to his madness. I had to take that into consideration. You're very attentive, I said. You seem to be alert. You seem inattentive, he responded, unbothered. Perhaps we just view things in different ways. Is there anything that worries you? No, he said, shaking his head. Nothing. And then perhaps you wouldn't mind answering some questions about yourself. I would not mind. They've tried asking you questions before, I added. How come you're only speaking up now? And David turned his head to the side, letting his eyes flicker from me and then back to various spots on the wall. He shook his head again. I did not know the language. I first asked him about his real name. He didn't understand the question. I told him my name and explained that I needed a name in return, so I knew what to call him. We finally settled on making David his official name, not that he needed one. I tried asking him how it was possible for him to not have a name. In all of my life, I had never met a child that hadn't been named. David explained that where he came from, having a name was too confusing, which brought me into a peculiar line of questioning. So let's talk about where you're from, I said. You don't seem to be from around here. I do not know if it is around here, he said. It is not a single location. Your parents moved around a lot. Hard to tell. Sometimes we moved, sometimes we were moved. Sometimes things moved around us. I don't understand. Oh, it's hard to explain to someone who's never seen it. Seen what exactly? And David leaned over the middle of the table and pointed his finger straight down. Where am I pointing? He asked. To the middle of the table. That is one answer. I'm also pointing at the floor. That is another relation. I am also pointing at the ground. There is sediment under there. Bedrock. If considering the other side of the world, I might be pointing at the ocean or a particular fish. He looked me in the eye. They had a strange, almost synthetic color. So I ask you, he said, where am I pointing? Only you could know. Yes, we can try to understand from context or intent, but the truth of the matter could be anything. So when you ask me where I'm from, there is not a singular answer. It is more of a concept. A person can't be born from a concept. No, but they can be born without one. David leaned back in his chair and named a couple more certainties that he could observe. The length of the room, the height, the number of legs on all combined chairs and tables. Certainties. It seemed to soothe them, somehow, to know that some things were undisputed. I was born in a place where time works different. Where a second can be a year can be a second. It can go backwards, forwards at the same time. I have a hard time believing that. It is an unusual environment, he said. Here, life is linear and simple. You can plan ahead. And you couldn't. Well, say I plan on eating. he said. But when I find my prey I might already have eaten, or the prey has been dead for decades, or I might see myself already eating prey and I must fight myself for a piece. I can't imagine living like that. Sounds like a nightmare. You need to navigate probability, David explained, the most likely result. And if you wish for a particular outcome, you start to look at the most probable way to get there. That is how you adapt, evolve. I looked him up and down. I asked if he wanted a coffee, and after a solid minute of consideration, he declined. I went outside for a moment to talk to the others and scarf down a sandwich. A colleague of mine was in the break room watching the interrogation from a security camera. He thinks he's a time traveler, he said. He's completely lost it. I don't know what to make of it, I said, but I wouldn't be surprised if he killed someone. Oh, that reminds me, we got the blood work, but you're not gonna like it. He handed me a file, pictures, data, statistics, and a little explanation in the far back. Most of the blood was from a mix of animals, mostly mammals but also part reptile, maybe even insectoid. How many gophers do you have to kill to get yourself covered in blood? My colleague asked. He's gotta be crazy. Maybe, I muttered, but I want to keep talking. I went back inside. I asked David about his parents. He didn't have a lot to say. In a world with uncertain times, a person could be one of many things. His mother was described as a beautiful saint, a horrifying monster as two twins carrying the same child. His mother was, in the infinity of things, every mother. And with that line of thought, I'm guessing you didn't call her anything, I said. She did not nurture me. The land did not allow it, he said. She is Lilia, mother. So in your world, where you're from, nothing can be a certainty. How do you survive in an environment like that? David considered this. His eyes stopped shifting for a while. Consider the salmon. I almost lost it. Out of all the things I had expected him to say, that was not one of them. The salmon swims upstream, breeds, and then dies. It is an effort for something that is essentially extinct. It does not know why it's doing it, but it is the best thing for the salmon as a species. Well, I suppose, yes. That is how you survive. You let yourself be led forward by what is most true to your nature. That is how you improve, and how you become what you need to be. And that is how you become who you are, by just going along with what needs to happen. I am the best version of me that there is, he said. I am the strongest, the smartest, the quickest. That is a fact. I am the version of me that swam all the way up the stream. You're the salmon that made it. You have to swim with the stream, he said, and you have to trust that it takes you where you need to go. The more I talked to David, the more that I got an insight of his worldview, where he came from. There were infinite possibilities and an infinite passage of time. To survive, he would have to be the best version of himself and learn to navigate the strands of chance. He never said it outright, but there was an implication that there were others like him, and versions of himself that didn't make it. And his mother, well, she was a mystery. This was his explanation for being the way he is. He was the best version of himself because he needed to be. It challenged me to consider what I would have looked like as a David. What was my best year? When was I at my smartest, strongest, and fastest? Could have been 20 years ago, it was hard to tell. But at my best, I might very well have looked like David. But even then, we were never anything alike. I couldn't help but get an eerie feeling about him. There was something alien about his demeanor. His fascination with probability and chance seemed so calculated. He was emotionless to the point of psychopathy, but maybe that was necessary. Before we finished up for the day, David held up a hand. "I'm not used to talking to others," he said. "I want to see if I can make you understand." "I would like to try," I said. "What did you have in mind?" "Pay attention to your right knee," he said. "That is the most probable way for you to change your outcome." "And how could you possibly know that?" "I can see, navigate," he explained. "That is how I survive." I said goodbye to David and was escorted out of the building. My things were given back to me, including the umbrella. There was a second location about a 10-minute walk southward, where personnel were supposed to stay the night. I wasn't given an escort, it was a straight walk, and the entire area was fenced off. If I looked closely, I could even see armed guards walking the perimeter. The rain had come and gone, leaving a mild trickle that muddled the ground. I followed a dirt road, thinking about what David had said. I had a hard time imagining a place where time wasn't linear, and to grow up in an environment like that didn't make sense. I tried to figure out what his real issue might be. While his talk screen came back negative and he had been under close observation for days, it was hard for me to say that we weren't just playing along with a madman. A drop of rain poked me in the eye, making me stop. I wiped my eyes and groaned. "Consider your right knee," he had said. But why? There was nothing wrong with it. Sure, I wasn't the track star that I had been in my youth, but I was as healthy as ever. I looked down. If I hadn't looked at my knee, I would have missed what was right in front of me. It barely stood out on the muddy path. But there was a timber rattlesnake slowly making its way across the road. That extra second it took for me to stop and hesitate had made me look down and spot it. It was large too, probably the largest snake that I had ever seen. Instead of me stepping on it or provoking it, it just made its way across the road and disappeared into the forest, leaving me questioning everything that I had heard up until that point. When I went to bed that night, I kept wondering about the many things that David had said. How he was the salmon that made it upstream, that you had to trust in the process and go with the flow, to embrace what was natural to your environment and being. I thought back on my own life, considering how that mindset would have changed things. Maybe I would have acknowledged the feelings that I had for Miley back in high school, before she had asked another guy to the prom. Maybe I would have pursued another kind of education, or lived in a different country. Maybe if I had accepted my needs and wants instead of pushing against them, I too would be the best version of myself. It made me wonder just how many rattlesnakes that I would step on over the years. So when I went back to David the next day, I did so with a lot of questions. It could still just be one long coincidence. He could still be a madman, but he was a madman who had made me think, and that intrigued me. The next time that I was face to face with David in that concrete room, I tried to make some small talk. I asked him about how he had slept and what he had had for breakfast. He didn't understand the question. He hadn't slept and he hadn't eaten. That was apparently something that he didn't understand. I pressed on with other questions. "Why did you want me to pay attention to my right knee?" I asked. "To increase the probability of a different outcome," he said, "as I told you." "But I don't understand how you can know this," I said. "It's impossible." "You see things in a linear way. I consider as many words as I can, and I pick the ones who resonate with the outcome that I want. The same goes for actions and things that I perceive." "So let's say you wanted to win the lottery," I said. "You could just pick the numbers that are most likely to win." I don't know who Lottery is. I see. David stretched a little and looked back up at the wall. He made a few more statements, seemingly to no one. The material of the walls, the texture of his clothes. Declarative statements of things that were certain. So, let's talk about how you got here, I said. No one has seen you around and nobody saw you arrive. I followed the flowers, he said. The blue sunflowers. They are small constants like breadcrumbs. Once you're strong enough to follow them, they lead you here. Sunflowers, never seen a blue one before. They are a certainty. I see, what a peculiar feature. It was a long journey. I had to go through many changes to make it here. What kind of changes? I asked. David looked down at his hand, stretching out his fingers. They didn't have a scratch on them, smooth, dainty. I'll put it into simple words, he said. Why does the salmon swim upstream? So it can mate, have children, I said. Yes, but that is for the benefit of another being, another generation. It does not benefit the singular salmon. But if it didn't, there would be no salmon, I said. So it has to. So it does something because it is compelled, and in doing so it succeeds. Now imagine there is only one salmon, that it gives a birth to itself, an unending cycle of swimming, birthing, dying. Sounds meaningless, I said. Is that how you perceive life to be? Not at all, David said. Because there will be new salmon. They will be better and faster swimmers. In 1,000 years, they might not die upstream. In 1,000,000 years, they might not even be salmon. So to you, perspective is different. You consider not just long-term effects, but effects that won't matter for thousands of lifetimes. Yes, David nodded. Everything we do for a purpose that is unknown to us. And yet, we swim up that stream, I said, and we die there so our children can live. He sat back down, nodding. He seemed pleased with himself, as if he had made me understand. His perspective was inhuman, to say the least. It was one thing to consider your actions in the context of your future self or your future children, but he was thinking about 1,000,000 generations from now. It made me question what kind of man I was really talking to. How many times have you tried swimming up that stream, David? Innumerable. So how come you look so put together? Have you stayed a salmon, so to speak? No, there are numerous changes, he said. I thought that was obvious. Can you give me an example? He considered my request and got up from his chair. He stepped past me and approached the door. It was locked and bolted from the outside. He slapped it firmly with his hand and I could hear a click, and then the door swung open. It wasn't supposed to do that. David! He stepped out into the hallway. 2 guards intercepted him, holding up their hands and asking him to stop. One of them pulled a taser. When David didn't stop, they fired, only for the taser to misfire and crackle. The guard dropped it and David turned to me. I am perfectly safe, he said. It is improbable that they would wound me. David, I understand your point, but you need to come back here. You wanted to see changes. Let me show you. And David stepped up to one of the guards. They dropped their taser and pulled out a handgun. The gun jammed in with the flick of his wrist. David grabbed it out of his hands. He unjammed the handgun in a casual motion, like he had done it 1,000,000 times. This is how we differ. And then he put the gun to his head and fired. My ears rang so loud that I didn't hear his body hit the floor. The facility erupted. Red lights on the walls, blaring alarms. Somebody covered me with a fire blanket, screaming at me to keep my head down. No shots were fired, but in the corner of my eye, I could see David's lifeless body on the floor, blood soaking into his blue Crocs. We were all moved outside and asked to proceed to our chambers. A long, shaky walk through the mud. No rattlesnake this time. Everyone was locked in their rooms overnight. No updates, no explanations, and just a small room with a single bedside table lamp and a whole lot of questions. It had happened so fast. What was David trying to prove? I had just gotten ready for bed when there was a knock on my door. I wrapped myself in a blanket and got up. A colleague of mine stepped in, looking wide-eyed and panting. "He's back. He's asking for you." "What do you mean?" David's back." I put my clothes back on, chugged 2 cups of coffee, and made my way back to the interrogation room. David was already there, sitting across from me like nothing ever happened. The door shut behind me with a decisive clang. They were taking further precautions. More guards and more locks. David didn't seem to mind. He had new clothes. "Another salmon swims upstream, another salmon ends," he said. "You died," I said, stifling a yawn. "It's not possible." "No, it is not probable, but it is certainly possible." "What happened to your body? How did you—" "I have adapted," David interrupted. "I have evolved." "You can't outrun death," I said. "Death and time are fundamental to human experience." "Why?" There were so many answers. How we had built entire civilizations around passing things along. How we learned to live with the inevitable end of the self. Our society wouldn't survive without the fundamentals of time and death in place, but David couldn't grasp it. And for the first time as I looked into his eyes, I truly believed he was something else. He had gone beyond human, beyond humanity. He had become something else entirely. And there was no telling what he was capable of. I would continue to interview David for days. According to the doctors on site, he wasn't just dead, he left his body behind. It had shriveled up into a dry shell like a spider's molt. But a healthy copy of David had suddenly been standing in that room like nothing had happened. They showed me pictures. A contorted carcass snapped open like an egg. He had died, and yet there he was. David would talk a lot about his experience growing up. To him, it made complete sense. He had died infinite times, done infinite things, but in a space where there was nothing but him and a harsh, deathless environment. He had fought countless instances of himself, trying to get better, faster, and stronger. And through every generation, something would change, and with infinite time and infinite variations, he had become something else entirely. He was a creature that had adapted to a timeless space. Perhaps he was born human, but what sat in front of me was something different. He saw things on a scale that I couldn't imagine, and he could track the strands of possibility connecting to outcomes of his choosing, like a hound following a distant trace from a drop of sweat. There were talks about physical limitation assessment. Some of the higher-ups wanted to kill him in different ways to see what would happen. Others wanted to use this in one way or another. Turns out his organs would molt and decay in less than a day after passing away, so he couldn't be used for harvesting healthy organs. These were the sort of discussions that I would listen to in the break room as my talks with David continued. After about a week, I shifted to a more immediate topic: his arrival. So you follow this trail of certainty, I said. These things, flowers that are unflinching and unchanging. Yes, I did. Then what of the blood? I asked. What of it? Where did it come from? Did you hurt someone? Changing takes a lot of effort. Sometimes you have to shed what you do not need. Wait, so the blood was your own? It was, yes. I brought out the files and showed him the blood work we had done, the various graphs and explanations. This is rodent, I said, pointing to a chart. And here, amphibian, possibly frog. 2 kinds of mammals. This isn't your blood. It is. But you're human. You're sitting in front of me as a human man. I am, yes. You are not a rat or a gopher. You're not a horse or a bear. So how come we're seeing a dozen different animals in what is supposedly your blood? Well, it takes effort to adapt. You have to go through several phases and iterations. No creation is immediate perfection. And David explained it as best as he could. The form sitting in front of me had been painstakingly crafted through his journey to solid time. In his way of salmon logic, he explained it as swimming upstream over and over again until he could finally find the legs to walk out of the river entirely. I just scratched my head and sunk my head into my hands. I was exhausted. David seemed nonplussed. I put the folder away with a shrug. They thought you had killed someone, I said. That's why they captured you to begin with. Captured? He asked. What do you mean? They took you in and brought you here. I'm not captured, he assured me. I choose to be here. Perhaps, but you were brought in as a prisoner, I'm sad to say. David stared at me without a word. He didn't blink. It occurred to me that up until this point, he might not have understood that he was in fact a prisoner. He didn't understand the context. David got up from his chair and walked up to the door. I stepped back, giving him some space. I will not be held against my will, he said. I came here willingly. We are not trying to maintain an adversarial position, I said. I'm sure we can work something out. Are you complicit? He asked. Are you my jailer? I was brought here to have a discussion, to learn, to better oppose me. Well, that's not my intention, but it is the outcome. He looked me up and down. He was seeing something and I noticed his demeanor shift. I was in danger. He grabbed his left hand and twisted it without a flinch, cracking it out of its socket. And then he did so again and again, causing bones and nerves to snap and separate. I could see his skin go from red to a sickly purple as he pulled the hand clean off and threw it into the corner of the room. The exposed bone of his arm twisted and spiraled, extending into a long spike. He lifted it towards me. I fell off my chair and crawled back. I could hear movement outside, but David wasn't attacking me. It was a show of force. Before I realized what he was doing, it was too late, and they were opening the door. Previously, before they reinforced it, all he had to do was knock the right gears out of alignment with a firm thwack. Now he had to make someone willingly open it from the outside. This was the best way to do so. It was calculated, probable. The moment the door flung open, all hell broke loose. Gunfire, blood splatter. In the flash from a gun muzzle, I saw a split-second view of a man with a bone spike plunged into his ear. David was taking a lot of damage, but he didn't seem to mind. The hand in the corner was still moving. It was such a stupid thing to pay attention to, but I couldn't help it. As David rampaged into the hallway, I curled up in the corner and hoped that it would all pass. Parts of the hand seemed to come apart, like a wilting flower, and then it moved. Every joint of his fingers turned into a beetle, and the palm of his hand extended into a kind of skin-like starfish. The beetles were crawling up the walls and escaping through the door. The chaos outside was dying down. It had only been seconds. I looked into the hallway. The lights had turned red, making all the blood look like puddles of ink. 4 dead, 3 guards, and one of my colleagues. They didn't even look like people anymore, just contorted meat. David had taken a dozen gunshots and he was leaning over one of the bodies. He plunged his healthy hand into it, and a second later, I could see something expanding through its chest. It was hard to see in the blinking red lights, tendrils erupting from a corpse. They crawled across the floor, gathering meat into a pile, slowly shaping broken legs and torsos into a multifaceted creature. Something close to 9 feet tall, an amalgamation of features, none of which were human but the silhouette. It faced David, and they had an entire conversation without saying a word. David had been wounded and his probabilities were imperfect. He had failed. He had swum upstream, and now he handed life off to another salmon, another him. So he too was ripped apart and consumed, leaving only part of his remaining arm behind. With every step closer to the outdoor doors, this creature began to look more human. It shed some features and it emphasized others. It grew smaller, thinner, and softer, folding its wings into skin flaps on its back, and breaking off its claws against the concrete walls. The final transformation was its mandibles being folded into its mouth, now lined with human lips. David had taken a new form, a woman this time, and she spoke in a melodic voice. "Red lights, cold floor, 1 witness, 65 fingers." She looked back at me but did nothing. She observed the room quietly and turned her attention forward. She kept speaking as she rounded the corner. "And don't forget your umbrella." It was improbable that I would be a hindrance. There was no point in killing me. Perhaps it was even a detriment. Maybe David knew that leaving me alive would be a deterrence to others. Or maybe it was just another threat of probability to some unknown end. The less that I saw of David as she stepped out of the main doors and disappeared into the night. As the warning lights died down, I was left alone in the dark, my feet wet with blood as panic ensued outside. I just stood there hearing little things skitter, blood dripping from the ceiling, plopping into puddles. It wasn't until the flashlight shone at me that someone screamed at me to get on my knees that I snapped out of it. As I was escorted out of the building, I grabbed the umbrella. And good thing I did. It was raining again. This was some time ago. I have never met or heard of anything like David since. A boy born in a timeless space, having used the aeons of time to pass himself into a form that could allow itself to leave. The universe is a big place. I often think about how small we are as a species. Everything we've ever known is on this one blue dot among untold trillions of dots. In the grand scale of things, we're insignificant. But that goes for time too. The passing of a single generation is nothing. And yet, it is absolutely essential. A single break in the chain and it would all be over. Perhaps David is what the future holds for us as a species. Maybe that's what we need to be to survive. And over untold billions of years, who's to say that's not what we're going to be? So maybe we have to take a step back just this once. Maybe we have to trust the process. And maybe we'll have to keep swimming upstream no matter the cost. In case we do, I'm keeping my umbrella. Susan Corn, Daki, Ray, Nelson Asada, Dice, Creamy, Meek, Asher, Dalabagara, That One Woodsman, Sonic, GMT, Leon Nutt, Takio Zarilla, Mina Lynn Getter, SWAT, Damon McCory, Mark Norman, yours truly, Dino, Lunas TV, Wayward Son, Deus Ex Nihilo, Big Country Allen, Pamela Shockley, Sleepy Shroomy, Caleb Windsor, Kathy McGuire, Paige Martin, Richard Friends, Shrimpo the Shrimp, Epi Massacre 91, Jacob Bartlett, Miss Eldridge, Casey Long, Justin Fotenauer, Roley, Sanjay Anthem, Lone Wolf Sam, Michelle Lee, Bradley Brewer, Agent Black, Michael Oliver, I'm not sure how smart giving out personal information is after something I thought could only happen in movies actually happened. But I'm scared about what this all could mean, and I want people to hear and know about this if something happens to me. I assure you that I am on no medication, suffer from no mental illnesses, and have no trauma of any kind and anything else that you might think of. I am a completely average person living a completely average life. Well, I was, I guess, up until now. My name is Marielle, and I'm from a small town in Georgia where everybody knows each other, and I work as a 911 operator. My family lives in a rural town out of state, and I haven't spoken to them about this yet out of fear that whatever's going on might somehow affect them too if I get them involved. Yesterday, I began my night shift the same way that I do every evening. Most of the time, I get low-priority calls and a few pranks. And since I've been doing this for a few years now, I've grown quite good at discerning what's an actual concerning call. The shift was rather tame up until I got what I thought was a prank call. 911, what's your emergency? I spoke into the phone after returning my cup of coffee back on the desk and readjusting myself. Somebody's outside my house. They've been looking around my yard and windows for the past 2 minutes. It was a woman on the other end. Her voice familiar ever since the first few words, but I couldn't quite place it yet. She spoke very fast, and it was obvious how nervous she was about this. No surprise there, I would be too. I thought it was some friend, but I don't know this person, and they look off. Okay, ma'am. Nudging my chair closer to the desk as I begin typing on the computer. I asked the lady another question in the meantime. Can you give me your address and tell me if you can see if this person is armed? Yeah, I'm in the yellow house at... The woman continued, but I admit I didn't listen. She had just given my house address. I stopped my fingers in the middle of writing and I sighed, thinking that this had to be one of my friends. We're a small bunch and very mischievous towards each other, sort of out of character for our age, I must admit. But I've said numerous times how serious prank calling 911 can be for people. Who is this? You know how badly this can end for you, right? I reached for my coffee cup, rolling my eyes and held my hand ready to hang up the call, but she continued. What? I don't get it. I'm serious, please don't hang up. She retorted in a tone that caught me off guard, and then again after a second, she returned to the previous somewhat panicked attitude. I'm sorry, but this isn't a joke. Please, I'm afraid of what this person might do. Okay, ma'am. I put the cup back on the desk and was ready to prolong this call to enough of an extent to make this woman face the consequences for holding the line. What bad luck for her, I thought, to get the operator living at the exact house she decided would be her target. What's your name and which room are you in right now? I'm Marielle and I'm looking at my bedroom window right now. They're still there. My blood started to boil. How senseless this person must be. It was obviously a friend. I raised my voice this time, warning them again about how badly they will regret their actions if they prank call again. And just as I was about to hang up, Marielle started to beg me frantically not to. For whatever reason, something inside me was telling me to listen. I decided to give her one more chance and then I would send the police over to arrest this prank caller and at the very least, give her a slap on the wrist. Okay, Marielle, describe the bedroom to me. What? You heard me. What color are the curtains? Is there any furniture, lamps? Tell me what you can see. Though I've known said friends for quite a while now, none of them have ever been in my house. I prefer it that way not because I don't trust them to enter my home, but because I've never been fond of having guests. Neither did my parents when I was little. It's something that they had that is transferred over to me. There's no way that this person would. Purple curtains, a double bed with a grayish cover with white lines, a wardrobe and a small bedside table with a nightlamp on it. She went on for a few seconds while I listened, completely dumbfounded. She was describing exactly how my bedroom looked. Her next words snapped me out of the confusion. Miss, why are you asking me this? There's somebody outside my house. I couldn't answer her immediately. This was all so surreal. Nothing like anything that I had experienced so far on this job. This woman apparently named Marielle, who sounds just like me, claiming she lives at my address and is standing in the exact same bedroom as mine, was talking to me, Marielle. How did any of this make sense? I tried to keep my cool and continue talking to her normally, but I could hear the shakiness in my own voice when all I could mutter was an "okay, ma'am," before falling silent again, and I rummaged around my desk drawer to find my personal phone. My ex-husband had installed security cameras facing the front, back, and sides of her house at different angles after some people had started talking about the same car driving around their homes multiple times during the day and night, but nothing ever came out of it. It didn't hurt to have the extra security measure, but I never thought that I would actually have to use it. I opened the app while this Marielle kept repeating, "Hello?" but I was too preoccupied to answer. I admit my heart had dropped into my stomach at this point, and it only got worse after I had opened the camera app. My bedroom window looked out on one of the sides of my house, and right beyond the wooden fence was somebody pacing left and right while looking up at the house. I finally snapped back. "Okay, Marielle, okay, I'm sending a patrol car your way immediately. Excuse the holdup." I tried to regain my composure but could still hear my words trembling as I spoke them out loud. While the person wasn't trespassing and technically not committing any crime, what puzzled me more was that I was currently completely free of any alcohol or drug influence, talking to myself, to another me. "Move away from the window to make sure that he doesn't see you. Do you?" I paused for a moment, taking in how ridiculous the whole situation was again, and finished my question, listening intently for the answer that was about to come from the other Marielle, not sure what I was expecting to hear. "Do you have a weapon in your house that you could use in case his intentions become malevolent?" I mean, the only thing I can think of right now are the knives in the kitchen. And there's an old pistol, but it's in the basement and the door to it is outside. Am I going to have to defend myself? She sounded stressed out as she asked, but I was more shocked to hear the same exact words that I would have said in response to this question. I have a pistol and it's in the basement, the door to which is outside. Still unable to comprehend all of this, I told Marielle, or me I guess, to check again to see where the person is, and reassured her that the patrol car is only a few minutes away from the house. Only now did I finally look around, thinking that I must be dreaming, and I caught the gaze of a fellow coworker who had his eyebrow raised. He must have been listening into my conversation and seen me acting off, but I tried to smile to the best of my ability and nod, quickly returning my focus to my screen before I could see his reaction. "Marielle, do you see them still?" I inquired but got no response for another few moments. She then stumbled on her words and I could hear the door creaking open just as my bedroom door did, and her footsteps rapidly moving from room to room, presumably looking out the other windows. No, he's not out there now. I don't know where he is. Oh God, did I miss him? Is he coming towards my house?" She sounded like she was on the verge of a panic attack. I did my best trying to calm her down while searching for the person myself, switching between different cameras, and when I found him I saw him in the backyard, with an arm raised in the middle of the air. Moments later, a rock flew towards my kitchen window, and though the cameras have no audio to them, Marielle's shriek was perfectly timed in sync with the impact. "Holy crap, he just broke one of my windows." She yelled frantically and began raving inaudibly into the phone. Marielle, get to your attic, quickly. The police will be at your place soon. Use anything you find up there to block the way in." I yelled back, raising my voice loud enough to overshadow hers, and to probably scare my coworkers with the sudden decibel increase. Whatever was happening, it was real. There was someone outside my house who had just broken a window and I was in there, afraid for my life. The advice that I gave her was exactly what I would have done. The attic hatch is in the middle of the hallway leading from the living room to my bedroom, giving her enough time to get up there and block it afterwards, considering this person had to pass through the kitchen and then through the aforementioned parts of the house. By my calculations, Marielle had enough time to get there and use all the pent-up trash and whatever else she could find to hold the hatch shut for the little time left that the police needed to arrive. I could hear Marielle slam the door behind her and run down the laminated hallway towards the hatch. And then I gasped audibly as she yelled into the speaker, and the phone dropped with a loud thud, her footsteps becoming more and more distant as another heavier set made their way faster and faster through the hallway and closer to the phone. "Are you still there? The police are almost at your location," was all that I could think to say in my last effort to scare whoever this person was away. A few seconds of silence and I expected to hear something, anything. Some scary or cryptid remark or at least breathing. But there was nothing. My last word into the receiver was an empty hello before the other end hung up. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and I must have sat at my desk, staring into the screen for at least 2 minutes before the same coworker from before, Connor, came and put his hand on my shoulder, prompting me to scream and push him away. The entire office looked our way and he put his hands up in the air. I apologized profusely more times than I could count. Everyone turned back to their desks, then Connor lowered his hands. "Tough call?" he asked and leaned to my desk, handed me a chocolate bar. "You seemed really on edge the entire time, and well, this just confirms it." I didn't even acknowledge the snack after I looked at it and just met his eyes again, not knowing what to say. I began with a few disconnected words before excusing myself and leaving the shift early. It's a little after 2:30 as I finish writing this. I booked myself a room into the most crowded hotel that I could find, with the room closest to the stairs leading to the reception, shutting the blinds and locking the door twice. I'm afraid to go home, and I don't know who to talk to about this without sounding completely insane. I've heard nothing from the responding police officers yet, and I don't know what to do about this tomorrow. Anybody reading this or listening, please believe me. And even if you don't, can you please offer me some advice? I just woke up and it's 4:16. 5 minutes ago, 2 calls from somebody with no caller ID woke me up, but I didn't pick up. I'm afraid for my safety. I sat in the cushioned armchair in the hotel room that Marielle had rented after running off inexplicably from her shift last night. I called earlier this morning after finishing work without even going to sleep. She's always been level-headed, and her acting like this made me feel concerned. I couldn't just let her go, and now here I was, listening to how she apparently spoke to herself last night on the phone. "Marielle, are you sure these night shifts aren't a bit too much for you?" Though I wanted to trust her, what she was describing to me sounded straight out of a book or a movie. And the lack of sleep really takes a toll too big for you to even comprehend. I'm not saying you're making this up, but maybe just you remembered it wrong. Marielle paced around the room with one hand resting on her hip and the other held up to her forehead, pushing her hair back, and she exhaled loudly. "I know this sounds insane, Connor, but I'm telling you, I'm 100% certain about what I heard and saw on those cameras. There was another me in that house last night, and some person broke my window. How can you be taking this so calmly? We haven't even heard from the responders yet, and it's been more than 6 hours." She was right. There had been no info back to us on that call, nothing on the news, and no contact from the officers. When I used Mariella's phone to try and call back whoever it was that woke her up, there was nothing. I told her that while I can't explain the call itself, I agreed that it was too dangerous for her to go back home considering that there was an intruder. I offered her to stay at my place for the next few days, and while she agreed and thanked me, she wouldn't let the topic of her other self go. I understood her to some extent, but I was still skeptical. And so I offered her to go back to my place so that I could change and grab the pistol that I kept locked in my safe and a flashlight, and then we could go and look for the officers at her house ourselves. She was afraid, but I think the curiosity and stress about what might have happened to the supposed other her prevailed, and was what had made her agree to this plan. I waited for her to get her things out of the room, and I drove back to my house, in the meantime asking her about any details she might have missed about the call to make sure that we were going in prepared. The drive to her house wasn't long, and during it, I tried to play some music to lighten the mood or talk to her about anything that I could to distract her, but all I got was 1 or 2 words in response, while she was lost in thought looking out the window. When we arrived, I parked in her driveway where, just outside, sat the policeman's car, with the 2 front doors slightly ajar but no sign of them. Mario's breathing fastened, and I put a hand on her shoulder to calm her down, and then without anything being said between the both of us, we got out of the car. The first thing we did was walk up to the police car and see if there was anything out of the ordinary, like slashed tires or any signs of a struggle. But it was parked there like any other vehicle, and there was nothing obvious on the inside. What I discovered though was the radio, which, while it didn't look like it had been tampered with, was not working. I walked back towards the house and called for Marielle to walk with me as we circled it from afar, finding the broken window leading into the kitchen. I was just about to suggest calling 911 again and have them go into the house while we wait outside, but Marielle snapped before I could even begin to speak. "Why is nothing being done about this?" She raised her hands in the air and turned to look at me, her blue eyes conveying a mixture of anger and confusion. 2 policemen have disappeared since responding to this call. There was an intruder in my home, and there was literally a clone or something of me inside while I was at work. Tell me why we haven't heard anything about this, Connor. I don't know, okay? If anything happened like you say it did, it just doesn't make sense. I cut her off before she started talking again, knowing that she would jump me for accusing her of lying. But we really should let the authorities handle this. We're not professionals. Marielle tried to get something out, but just cut herself off and shook her head. I thought that she had given in and would do the logical thing and take my advice. Instead, she turned and walked a few steps towards her back door and then looked back at me. "What are you doing?" "I'm going in. No one's gonna listen to me anyway, and I'm not about to leave here without at least some kind of answer or clue." I stared at her, completely taken aback, and I waited a few seconds to see if she would say anything else. But she just stayed there looking right at me. I knew deep down she was hoping that I would say that I'm going in with her. Well, before I did that, I tried to convince her to think this through again, but that was obviously not going to work. So that's just what I did. But I have to admit I was getting nervous myself. The back door was unlocked and led into a different hallway than the one that she had told me about, which I figured out by the lack of an attic hatch. Marielle told me the layout of her home and we walked together, me in front and with my gun drawn as I called out asking if anybody was there. She smacked my shoulder and raised her arms with wide eyes, and I shushed her. We had no way of knowing if there was an intruder or police officers, or both, and I didn't want blood on my hands, no matter whose. As you might expect, we got no response from anywhere and heard nothing that might indicate that there was anybody else in there with us. We found nothing out of the ordinary in the rooms of Marielle's home, but the hallway with the attic had some things worth noting. The first being what we immediately saw: the phone on the ground, and slight marks like scratches on the walls, which were the only signs of anything out of the ordinary. Well, besides the broken window. That must be what she used to call. It's identical to mine. She grabbed it and tried turning it on, but it had no battery left. The screen was slightly cracked at the top right edge, probably where it had first impacted the floor. What is going on, Connor? Calm down, I began, knowing that she wouldn't listen. There's only the attic and the basement left for us to look through. We can check up there and then go down last. How's that sound? Yeah, okay, but the basement's locked. If the key hasn't been moved, it must be in one of my bedroom drawers. Alright, I'll check out the attic while you go get the key. There's no point in both of us going up there. I raised the gun in the air while reaching for my flashlight. And don't worry about me. Marielle nodded and began walking towards the bedroom, disappearing past the door after I had started ascending into the attic. There was nothing on top of the hatch, which I realized before even looking around to see because of how easily I was able to lift it open, confirming our suspicions that the other woman hadn't made it up there before the end of the call. What immediately struck me as odd was the immediate drop in temperature here. I mean, yeah, it was an attic, but the difference must have been at least 10 degrees, and I shivered as I made my way up and started shining the light across the entire space. Behind empty old boxes, worn out furniture, and the various other items not worth noting. There was no place for anyone to hide up here, or at least, not if you ask me, because I looked through every nook and cranny there was and found no traces of anyone or anything. Walking back, I started descending the ladder and called for Marielle, but I got no response. I wasn't immediately concerned because the hatch was left open, and if anything had happened, I would have heard it. Waiting for a few seconds and remaining without a response, I made my way towards the bedroom, which was just as empty as when we looked in there together earlier. I called out for her again and started looking through each of the rooms, and while doing that, I paused for a moment to listen, but not for Marielle. The background noises from earlier, like birds or passing cars, had all stopped. Again, that didn't strike me as odd at that moment. Looking through the rest of the rooms proved fruitless, and I thought that maybe she had gone outside, probably waiting for me by the basement. And so I made my way to the back door and I opened it. It led me back into the living room. I blinked and looked behind me. I was certainly in the same corridor that we were first in when entering the house. Despite that, I shut the door and turned back to exit from the front of the house. And when I opened that one, I was greeted with the kitchen. I just stood there for a few seconds, unable to take in what was happening, and I rubbed my eyes, but here I was, still inside the house, standing right at the front door, which was leading me back inside. I walked through and approached the window that was broken by the intruder. Instead of the green yard, the street with parked cars and neighboring houses, I was greeted by a view into the bedroom. My heart started pounding, and I admit that I was on the verge of a panic attack. I started sweating profusely, and my heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest as I began running from room to room, door through door, trying to get out and again finding myself in different parts of the house. I had to stop and sit down for a few moments before I would pass out, and while regaining my composure, I saw something odd. Not that this whole situation wasn't far more disturbing than I'm giving it credit for. I noticed that the walls of the living room where I was currently sitting had changed color, and half the table was just missing. Like, imagine a bug or a glitch in some video game where half a piece of furniture is there and the rest is gone. The table still had two of its legs on which it was standing completely fine, but the surface was cut diagonally and the rest of it just wasn't even there. I waved my hand through where it was supposed to be and they just swiped right through the air. I continued walking through different rooms and the changes began getting more and more apparent. Like the chandelier in the kitchen was upside down and sitting in the middle of the air attached to nothing. It was physically there, and when I tried pushing it, it wouldn't move, but I could feel and touch it. I don't know how long I spent in this place, but for the first time in what was now feeling like hours, I heard a noise. Breathing. Rapid, scared breathing just like mine when I found myself here. It was coming from the neighboring room. I couldn't say which one, as by now it had been a gamble where I would stumble at. I ended up appearing back into the bedroom, where I was greeted by a gruesome sight of a tall man with torn clothing and wounds, superficial and deep all over his body, lying in a messy pool of red and something dark mixed with it, some of which was splattered on the wall behind him, where I saw the same scratch marks as the ones on the walls of the hallway before. It was as if I had an instantaneous flashback after seeing him. What remained of his clothing was the same as what the person who broke into Marielle's home was wearing. He was still alive, but his eyes were red and he screamed as he saw me. I did the same in reaction. "No, no, no, get away from me." He yelled through pained inhales and tried to muster up strength to throw one of his shoes at me, but it only got over his leg and was barely any further away from him. "Get away." "I'm not going to hurt you. Look, You're not real." Taking the risk of giving him a heart attack that would finally take him out of his misery, I rushed by his side and held my hands in the air, yelling loud enough to silence him. I started shooting every question that I could think of at him, and when he stopped trying to talk over me, I grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. He looked as if he was about to faint any moment now, and I asked him what this place was, why he broke in, if he knows Marielle, and I could barely get any coherent response out of him until he grabbed my right arm with a strength that he didn't look like he had, which left me shocked and silent. During my time of silence, he spoke. "Not people. Fake." Before I could inquire, he could reveal more himself, I was suddenly thrown into the wall next to the man. I couldn't even yell in reaction to the pain. Another blow struck me right in the ribs, and the pain was so unexpected and strong that I held my eyes shut and clutched at my sides. Amidst the chaos, I could hear the man scream, and suddenly what I assume happened was that he got thrown away. His screams continued but faded in the distance, and I heard a crash and glass breaking. Mere moments later, just as I was about to open my eyes, I was grabbed by one of my arms and flung right back out of the room's door. Suddenly, all the noise stopped, and I stayed curled in a ball on the floor, tears of pain streaming down my cheeks as I held my hands over where I had been kicked or punched or whatever happened. I assumed that I had at least 2 broken ribs, and I could barely touch the area without sharp pain coming in. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the attic, but this time I could hear Marielle yelling for me downstairs. I slowly got myself back up, holding my side while descending back down into the corridor. I could hear that the neighborhood sounds had returned. "I'm here," I shouted and sat on the floor while waiting for her to arrive. When she did, she gasped and ran at me, putting a hand on my shoulder asking me what had happened and how I got hurt. "We have to get out of here." She helped me get up, allowing me to lean over on her as we started walking out. "I'll explain it at the hotel." I allowed her to drive, and she kept asking me questions in the meantime, but I was too exhausted and in pain to respond coherently. We arrived at the parking lot, and she turned to face me, looking me in the eyes and saying something that I didn't even register at that point. I was too caught up in a small detail that I knew that I would have noticed for all the time that I've known her. "Marielle, since when are your eyes 2 different colors?" I couldn't find the key to the basement no matter where I looked in the bedroom. I don't remember misplacing it, but with everything that's happened in the past 12 or so hours, I wasn't about to question something as mundane as this. Afraid to go too far without Connor, I decided to wait by the ladder up to the attic for him to finish searching, and maybe join him if he found something. But when I stopped to listen, I could hear no footsteps or any noise coming from up there. "Connor?" I called while looking up at the darkness above me. Seeing no ray of light from his flashlight either, but I heard him speak to me and figured that he must be quite a way inside. "I'm up here." His voice was flat and it just sounded strange and not quite like him, but I choked it up to the way that sound carried itself from above to the hallway. Come up. I found something. What's up? I asked, starting to climb the ladder but didn't get the answer that I expected. Actually, I got no answer at all. Connor? I called again with my head now poking up into the attic, and I finished descending. I cleaned my hands of the dust and shivered from how cold it was up here. And then I looked around and found myself completely in the dark, with no light coming from anywhere. Something felt wrong, and I wasn't sure if the next chill that ran through my body was from the cold or my intuition. I didn't wait around to find out and quickly climbed back down into the hallway where the cold of the attic followed me. It was strange to say the least. It wasn't like that before when I had gone up there. I waited for a little while wondering what had caused Connor to behave so unlike himself. The cold was too much and I began feeling uncomfortable. So while waiting for him, I decided that I would go back into the bedroom to grab a jacket. But upon opening the door, I was greeted to my living room. I don't think that I need to describe to you how I felt at that moment, but I began growing more and more concerned as I wandered from room to room and found myself in an impossible loop of my own home, to which I was now like a mouse to a trap. Occasionally, after going through each room so many times, I could hear sounds that didn't seem to fit, and objects denying reality itself. Windows had been placed on ceilings looking into nothing, furniture floating in the middle of the air or clipping into the floor, a reality show playing in the middle of my kitchen in which there was no TV. To say the least, I was terrified and convinced that I would never make it out of here, as everything only seemed to get worse and only that much more confusing. And no matter how much time I spent looking in each room, I would move to the next and I would find nothing that even hinted at a way of getting out of this maze. Adrenaline flooded my body in the middle of my search of the kitchen when I heard footsteps and increasingly louder static mixed with a voice constantly changing its pitch, but not in a regular way. Rather, this voice was constantly swapping between male and female. There was nowhere in the kitchen to hide, so the only thing that I could do was hide behind the counter on the other side and stay as silent as I could be, considering the circumstances. I covered my mouth and still feared the sound of my heart pounding would be enough to give me away. The three sounds moved closer and closer together and eventually reached the kitchen. The footsteps came to a stop, but what I was hearing disturbed me in a way that nothing had been able to in all my time alive. What I heard, presumably coming from the entrance to the kitchen, was like I said, a voice swapping between that of a man and a woman, mixed in with radio static, citing yesterday's news and then the weather report, random conversations and then something all too familiar. 911, what's your emergency? It was my voice. My breathing froze and I slowly looked up without revealing myself from the counter, expecting whatever was here in the kitchen with me to be looking down like in a horror movie, but thankfully there was nothing. The voice continued swapping between the voices of two other men, mine and out of nowhere, Connor's. Marielle, since when are your eyes two different colors? I widened my eyes in disbelief and covered my mouth with both hands, praying whatever this was would leave. The static grew louder first, and then it began stopping and starting again at random intervals, while this thing continued repeating the same phrase over and over again. It was sickening to listen to. Marielle, since when are your eyes two different colors? By now, the voices had stopped swapping, and only Connor's was the one repeating this. And then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the footsteps began walking in the opposite direction, and the phrase fading into the otherwise silent house. I was so petrified by what had just happened that I couldn't bring myself to get up for another few minutes, and I had to keep myself from crying. After spending enough time with just myself and no inexplicable sounds showing up, I stood upright again and looked around to find that I was alone. It finally dawned on me that because of the state of panic that I was in, I had completely forgotten the most obvious part of the kitchen, the window that the intruder broke to get inside. It was still shattered, but unlike most of the other windows that looked into nothing or just walls, beyond it was my bedroom and the sight of a body on the ground that I couldn't recognize. I yelped when I saw it, and then noticed that it was lying in a pool of red. I crawled through the window and approached it slowly. Being able to get closer to it allowed me to see that its clothes, though torn and bloody, were the same as the ones the man who had broken my window was wearing. The realization made me stop in my tracks for a moment before resuming my crawl towards him. It was a man whose face I could not see. It was turned away from me and the hood of the gray hoodie, or what remained of it, was still up. There must have been some kind of fight with someone or something, because over his legs was my bedside table, with the lamp broken on the ground and glass scattered all around. Carefully kneeling down as to not cut myself, I turned the man's head towards me, revealing the wide-eyed, bloody face of somebody that I knew all too well. Lying before me dead on the ground after breaking into my home was my ex-husband, Russell. I never talked about Russell much to anyone after we had finalized our divorce. I had long since been emotionally detached from him after 2 years of growing neglect that made us argue more and more every day, and we would end up not talking to each other for weeks after some of the fights. Everything started as what I first thought was a way for him to try and scare me, as he knew that I had always been afraid of anything horror related. So he found it funny to occasionally read out a scary story or pop out of a corner to see my reaction. I never paid him much mind and only laughed it off when he started talking about the other side and the mirror people. But he kept getting more and more interested in it until that was everything that he would talk about from day to night, sometimes not even sleeping to continue what he called his research, and what I found to be mindless scrolling on the internet and reading made-up articles about some made-up thing to scare teenagers in gullible minds. Now, after everything that I had seen and gone through, I remembered all of it for the first time in a few months, after I had been able to bury it in my mind. I don't know what he was doing here, or why he was trying to break into my home, and how he ended up like this. So many thoughts flooded through my head instantly, most of them grief and confusion, but I had no time to process any of them as I jumped back at the sight, and a piece of glass pierced through my right palm and I let out an involuntary yelp. Just as I did that, I immediately heard the same sounds from earlier, footsteps and voices with static mixed in, repeating random words and phrases. But this time there was more than one, and they were coming right towards me. I turned to my bed and I rushed to hide under it, having no time to get to the wardrobe or try and make my way back through the window and into the kitchen. The covers were hanging loosely and covered half the space below the bed, so if I stayed quiet, I would have a chance to go unnoticed. The unearthly sights kept coming. Rushing into the bedroom were 3 men, 2 in police uniforms whose movements were unnaturally stiff and their faces expressionless, their eyes not even moving. And the third was not Connor. I mean, it looked like him, it had his face, but his expression was constantly changing. From a smile to nothing, to a grimace to sadness, to every single emotion that you could think of. His clothes were the ones that I had seen him in when he changed after he went to his house, only their colors were changing rapidly. And then in the blink of an eye he was wearing a suit, again the colors changing and mixing. What terrified me the most about the view was his limbs. Like I mentioned, the policemen were totally stiff and unmoving, but this Connor's look-alike limbs were spasming and flying around in movements the human bodies simply couldn't perform. One moment his arm was by his side and the next it was raised backwards 90 degrees, instantly afterwards pointing forward and then clipping into his body before returning to normal again, and his head snapped violently from side to side, as if his neck were constantly breaking and repairing itself. Their presence brought with them the static, but once they had entered the room, the voices had stopped, and they just sat there for about half a minute before the static began ringing so loud that I almost had to cover my ears, and then the 3 just disappeared. They were gone as if they had never been there. I waited to see if anything would return again or if I would hear any noises, but the only thing was total silence and the body of my ex-husband uncomfortably close to me while I was hiding. I crawled out from under the bed and took one more look at him before quickly jumping through the window and into the kitchen again. Only this time it led me back into the hallway with the attic. There was sure to be emotional fallout from this, but my brain was not letting me process it now. Before I could even look around, I was tackled by something into the wall and my mouth was covered, preventing me from screaming no matter how I tried. I started throwing my hands erratically into this thing, trying to hit it and make it release me, but it only began shushing me and reduced the strength of its grip. I opened my eyes to see Connor, bruised and disheveled, his clothes dirty and stained with blood. He stared at me and spoke, blue eyes, and then licked at my bloody hand and let me go, before that pressing a finger to his lips, telling me to stay silent. Seeing him so beat up while the rest of those things looked, well, completely abnormal and impossible to even exist, and considering the fact that he was not the actual Connor and wanted to harm me, it had the opportunity to but didn't. Connor? I whispered and eyed him up and down. He really had had it rough somewhere. Is it you, the real you? Yes, quiet. Marielle, something's here and it's not human. Connor was more afraid than I had ever seen him, and he gave the impression of somebody who was not easy to scare. We need to find a way out. How did you end up here, from the attic? Yeah, the first time. The first time? After making sure we heard none of those things approaching and looked through the window in each of the doors, Connor and I sat in the middle of the hallway where he explained to me how he had been attacked by something after finding the intruder and was thrown back into what we assume was reality, where I found him and we drove back to the hotel. That's where he had seen that my eyes were different colors, and bringing it up caused this other Marielle to begin distorting her limbs, and just like I had seen the other Connor do, and her head had started to twitch. Before he could get out of the car, she lunged at him from the driver's seat, and he woke up again in the middle of the living room. We were able to mutually shock each other, him with his experience and me with the fact that this intruder was my ex-husband. So why did he break into your home? Does he hate you or did he want to hurt you? No, it was obvious to me that he still loved me even after all the arguments and the divorce. I was the one that ended things. But he had spoken about the other side and the mirror people. That's what he called them. I blinked and moved my eyes from staring into the wall that was not the right color to look at Connor. I think that he knew something about this and he was trying to warn me. We sat in thought for a little while longer before he got up and helped me off the floor. We have to find a way out fast, Marielle. The door we went through led us into my bathroom, or this place's version of it. It looked exactly like it normally does, which was unusual aside from one thing, and that was the mirror, which did not have its usual reflective surface, but it was instead looking into another bathroom. We looked around thoroughly first before I helped Connor climb up the sink and he crawled through. The second he did, however, he disappeared and I was left all alone again, afraid to turn back and unsure of what else to do. I started making my way onto the sink with one leg and through the mirror with the rest of my body. Halfway through, I turned in reaction to hearing an ear-piercing scream coming from a woman mixed with the undertone of a male voice and that static. Charging through the door of the bathroom and right at me was me. The other Marielle's eyes were wide and her mouth open as loud as it could humanly go, and she grabbed me by my ankle and began pulling me back in. I held on to the edges and screamed, using my other leg to kick at her hands, but she wouldn't let go, only intensifying these inhuman screams that will forever haunt my nightmares. Despite that, I continued trying while looking around to see if there was anything on the sink that might help me, and I saw the glass cup that I used to keep my toothbrush in. I grabbed it and used all my strength to slam it into the other Marielle's head, shattering it. A final kick into her face was enough to force her to release me, and I made the rest of my way into the mirror, her scream stopping as if I had just woken up from a dream. I dropped down onto the floor with a loud thud, immediately pushing myself back up against the wall and hyperventilating while Connor looked at me unsure of what to do. "Hey, what the heck happened? Why did it take you so long?" He knelt by my side and winced in pain, putting his left hand over his ribs. "Well, the other me dang near dragged me back in." "Holy, well, you don't have to worry about that, I think. Look." Connor pointed to the mirror after my breathing slowly started to go back to normal, and I only saw pitch black in it. "Looks like we found the way out." "How do you know that we're out?" "Listen, there's noises outside. You hear those construction workers, the cars." I nodded and took in the sounds that he was describing. "I don't know if you noticed, but there's none of that in there." I stood up and approached it, not daring to put my hand through but stared into the black void. I would describe what I was seeing as impossible, but considering everything that had gone down just now, I don't think that that word has any meaning anymore. "We need to get out of this house before we get trapped again. Is your car still outside?" I asked as I opened the door leading out into the hallway, making sure to check beforehand. The house looked completely normal. "No, I don't know where it is. Maybe still at the hotel, or honestly, I have no idea. I just showed up here again after being attacked by whatever that thing pretending to be you was." My car was at the hotel also, at least that's where I left it after ending my shift early following that call. So we decided to call a taxi to get us to Connor's house where we could both take a break and get fixed up, hopefully without having to worry about being pulled into another dimension, or whatever the place that we were trapped in was. After I took a shower, Connor went to rest, and he made sure that he had no wounds that he was missing. I had wrapped my hand in bandages before using his laptop, with his permission of course, to do some research on what Russell had been so obsessed with all that time ago. The weight of finding the man that I had spent so much time in love with dead in a place that couldn't exist still hadn't come down on me, but at least it allowed me to remain focused. Looking up Mirror People and The Other Side together yielded scattered and terribly written posts with grammar and spelling mistakes, packed with action scenes that were obviously works of fiction by people who had stumbled upon something similar online. But one of the top results was an actually well put together website describing these entities as another me, documenting reports of people seeing and hearing, talking and even interacting with themselves. But by the time it had reached that point, no more updates had been posted. I showed the website to Connor and he browsed through it, finding something that I hadn't looked for yet at the bottom corner of the page. It was the creator of the website's name, a middle-aged woman by the name of Rebecca Simmons, and contact information about her email, encouraging people who have an experience to share to contact her. We have nothing to lose, right? I mean, this all sounds completely insane and psychotic, but we just went through it. And this woman is probably the only person ready to believe us right off the bat. Connor looked at me again, but suddenly his eyes trailed towards my injured hand. "Sure. Are you going to write that email or should I?" Connor didn't reply and he seemed zoned out. "What's wrong?" "Marielle, what's happening to your hand?" I looked at my injured hand and gasped, and then quickly lifted up the leg of my pants to see the same thing on my ankle. At the same time, Connor lifted one side of his shirt enough to see where he had been attacked. My hand, ankle, and that part of Connor's torso were pitch black. An excruciatingly long day full of fear and anxiety passed before we heard back from Rebecca. She had messaged us asking to meet in person after we had described our situation in detail, but warned us in advance that she does not know how helpful she would be. The drive to the address that she had given us was about an hour and a half away in Augusta, where she had a small apartment that she was staying at currently. Connor and I walked to the hotel to find my car still there, but his had disappeared. We kept a close eye on our wounds and bruises, unsure of what they actually were, and if they could spread. We were relieved to see that they still hadn't. I would like to say we discussed theories and possible reasons for why this was happening, and why to us. but we were so afraid and exhausted by now that we barely said anything to each other. I had spoken to my family on the phone earlier and had to pretend that everything was okay, when deep down I wanted to cry into the receiver to my mother and ask her what to do. Anything we tried to find regarding the missing police officers who responded to the call that night online was met with old articles that coincidentally had some of the same keywords that I had used in my search. There was nothing on the news either. It was as if nothing had happened at all. We arrived in Augusta a little after noon and turned from the main street to town into another narrow road that led to Rebecca's neighborhood. We climbed up to the 3rd floor and rang her bell. Footsteps approaching the door a few moments later and stopping, presumably looking through the large peephole before she opened the door to greet us. What we saw in person was a woman slightly older than the one on the website, so I assumed the photo must have been taken some years ago. "Good afternoon, I assume that you're Mary Ellen Connor." She pushed the door open fully now and looked at me first and then at him. "Yes, thank you for having us, Miss Simmons. We're not sure who we can even turn to about this." Connor nodded and then brought his head down slightly as if admitting defeat. "Nobody, I hate to tell you. You're not the first to come to me about something like this, but you're probably the only ones to have." She seemed hesitant to finish her sentence but did so after a brief pause. "Survived." Connor and I turned to meet our eyes and Rebecca invited us in, apologizing for saying what she did and shut the door behind us once we had entered. She went to make us coffee while we took our shoes and jackets off and made ourselves comfortable in her living room, and I tried taking some of the stress off by petting her puppy, a French bulldog that couldn't have been older than a few months. They allow pets in the building. I tried initiating small talk when she came back to set a friendlier tone before we got to what we were really here for. "Now you can say that. Honestly, the owner is against animals of any kind in the apartments, but I convinced him how little trouble he would cause and that if he broke or damaged anything, I would pay back in full. Isn't that right, Frankie?" In response, Frankie mustered up a half bark and licked her hand as she went to pet his head, and then sat down on the opposite side of the sofa that me and Connor were on a small cushioned chair. "I know who you are, Marielle." I must admit that phrase almost sent me into fight or flight considering that I'd been on edge to say the least for the past little over 2 days, and I was ready to jump up and run out of that apartment. But she continued just in time to allow me to prevent myself from doing so. "Your husband contacted me a year ago trying to find out more about the mirror world and the creatures living in it. I'm sorry to hear what happened and that you had to relive it, writing it in the email." Her mentioning my ex-husband's death was a gut punch, as I still hadn't even started processing it over the weight of everything that's happened, and I stared blankly at her. Connor noticed and took over the conversation for me. "Did he mention anything that we might need to know? Why he was trying to break into Mariella's home?" Rebecca took a sip from her coffee, which still had steam coming off of it, and switched her gaze to me, picking up Frankie off the floor once he had jumped off as soon as I stopped petting him, obviously completely disinterested in me now, and set him on her lap. "Because he was afraid of exactly what's happening to you. I can't put this any other way, so I'll be forward about it. Russell did not seem exactly in his right mind even back then. He was talking about all kinds of theories and supposed discoveries that he had made that sounded like the ravings of a madman. But what was evident to me was his duty to protect you from it. I assume that's why he was there that night, but he was unlucky enough to encounter something that only appeared to be you." Both Connor and I were at a loss for words at how casually this woman seemed to be talking about this, as if it was an everyday occurrence that some body snatchers who apparently lived in your mirror or something like that took over your life and pretended to be you. But that didn't stop her from continuing. Admittedly though, he was one of the few to have actually come to me with more than just claims of there being another version of them. "So what are these things, and why are they targeting us?" Connor said, not having even touched his coffee yet. Not that I did either. "I don't know for sure how they choose their hosts, as I call them, but from what Russell and others before and after him have told me is that They form when you feel lost for an extended period of time in your life, like a piece of you seems to be missing. Is that description accurate for you after your divorce, Marielle? Part of me was getting more and more furious at how confidently this woman was trying to gouge the low points in my life, but I couldn't bring myself to go against her when everything she had been saying so far was correct. And it didn't help that she sounded so confident. Well, maybe it did. Because we were finally talking to someone who not only believed us, but seemed experienced in the topic at hand. It does. And I guess the same goes for Russell. He started talking about all of this a month after his father had passed in a tragic work accident. I thought that he was taking the loss really bad, but my God. I took a moment to think everything through and allowed myself to finally take a sip from the coffee that Rebecca had made before continuing. You said that he had made some kind of discovery when he had come to you. What were you talking about? Well, I don't know if your husband had ever come in contact with any of them, but according to him, the only way to sever these beings' connection to you was to destroy them in their own world. I'll be honest that I was up until very recently skeptical about its existence as a whole, considering no one had ever actually been to it, or at least done that and returned to tell the tale. But here you two are, and you have evidence. She held her hand up to her ribcage while also looking at my ankle, referring to the dark marks that Connor and I had. I'm sure that he felt as unnerved as I did at the mention of them. And what do these markings mean? Do you know? Connor joined in. My theory is that it's this other reality's way to manifest itself into our own. I can't tell you what that means or how dangerous it may be, but I hope that nobody has to find out. She put Frankie back on the ground and he tried to get her attention again by scratching on her left leg for a second, before making a sound like an angry toddler and curling up by her feet. And then Rebecca leaned on her knees and her eyes darted from Connor's to mine and back. I know that this will sound like a death wish, but you were already there once. You twice even, Connor. And you both managed to escape. In all my time following this phenomenon, I've not heard or met anyone who's done that. I would say that it's your decision if you wanted to do this. But with those marks that you have, I'm not sure if you have any choice in the matter if you want to stay. You must go back and destroy your imposters before they claim you. I don't have to explain how hard my stomach dropped as we were literally instructed to go back into that maze that took the form of my home. But at the same time, there was no other solution that we could think of, and I'm sure that it had been floating around Connor's head as much as it had been in mine recently. But how do we even go about doing it? We don't know what they even are. How are we supposed to fight them? My voice trembled at the mention of a confrontation with them. We don't call them mirror people just because we came up with it randomly, Marielle. We came out of that world through your mirror. You see how they're trying to become you slowly. So, Rebecca stood up and walked over to one of the walls of the apartment that had a large rectangular mirror on it. My guess is that attacking them with glass will be effective in hurting and potentially killing them. Your guess? Connor stood up and I felt the disbelief in his words as if they were my own. You're telling us to enter whatever that place is again, most likely walking straight to our death or God knows, maybe something even worse. And all you have to go off of is your guess. She turned back to face him, seemingly unaffected by his demeanor, and crossed her arms before speaking. Like I said, I've never encountered one of them myself, and I'm only going off of what I've heard by people that I've spoken to both in person and through my forum. If it makes you feel better, I'm more than willing to come with you. I've been investigating this far too long, and I want to be able to help others in your situation, if they ever come to find me. So you're saying this isn't just happening to me, it's a whole phenomenon. When was the first time something like this happened? I can't tell you for sure, Marielle. Rebecca shrugged and now turned her whole body to face us, and Connor shook his head while sitting down but remained silent. But you are not the only one being haunted by yourself. You might realize now, though, why it's not a widespread threat. People who look for help from those not familiar with it end up ostracized or thrown into mental hospitals. We stayed at Rebecca's apartment for another half an hour, going through Connor's and my experience in the mirror world, and then getting ready to leave and drive back to my house. It sounds just as insane as it did then typing this out. Our conversation on the drive back with Connor in the driver's seat this time was mostly filler or silence. As much as I didn't want to admit it because she was still helping us, Rebecca was not a great person to be around, and I can see why she'd been doing something so out of the ordinary considering how apathetic she seemed to people's emotions. And the second thing that I was looking forward to the most after freeing myself of the other me's torment was not having to spend another second with her. After she gave us some more information and theories about what we have to do, we came to the conclusion that we had to get rid of mine and Connor's double in order to sever our link to this other reality or dimension. We decided that we would do our best to destroy those of the two policemen who disappeared in response to the call if we found them. And I'm sorry if this makes me sound like a bad person, but I was not ready to spend more time in that place while trying to save someone that I didn't know. And I just wanted it to be over already. And I think Rebecca was the only one who, despite all her supposed experience, failed to realize that we were literally about to enter another dimension to fight beings that were nothing close to humans, when she urged us to make it our goal to find them as well. Arriving at my driveway was just as chilling as before, the eeriness amplified by the police car still outside. On our way, we had passed by a store to buy a medium-sized mirror that we broke in order to arm ourselves with shards of its glass, an idea suggested by Rebecca that I was not sure how it made me feel, when you take into account the superstitions around the bad luck that will follow you when you break a mirror. She seemed to not care and was more than happy to shatter it without a second thought. Of course, getting herself the longest and sharpest piece she could find and leaving us with the shorter ones. We explained to Rebecca that going up into the attic is what sent both Connor and I into the other world, and he was the first to go up the ladder, then Rebecca, and finally myself. All three of us commented on the sudden chill and cold of the attic and then slowly descended back into the hallway to find nothing out of the ordinary until the first time a room repeated. But what was stranger than usual was how the distortions appeared almost instantaneously, with floating or half-missing furniture, misplaced windows, and the like. I can't believe I'm actually seeing this myself. For a change, this time Rebecca sounded like the one completely lost in the situation. I don't know about Connor, but it made me feel more in control, like I knew what to expect. Of course, I didn't. Okay, listen to me. I tried to sound as confident as I could to grab their attention. I have an idea. We can walk all we want and expect to find one of those things, or we can draw them to us. While I was here, when I made a noise, they came almost instantly. So let's devise a plan. I looked around the room that we were currently in. It was the kitchen, a perfect place for an ambush. I would stay behind the counter by the window looking towards the doorway, on either side of which Connor and Rebecca would wait with glass shards in hand to stab them into whichever creature came first. They agreed to the plan and took their positions while I looked into one of the shelves floating in the middle of the air, instead of which were small glass cups, not behind on defying the laws of physics. Looking back at the others and raising the cup in the air, they nodded in approval and I took a deep breath and braced myself, squeezing my shard in the other hand. Before I dropped the glass, I looked at the mark on my hand, which seemed to have grown to almost consuming my entire palm. We had to get this done, or who knows what would follow us. I simulated a pained yell as I threw the glass onto the ground, and seconds later, the all too familiar static and distant voices started storming towards the kitchen from the other room. Turning the corner was a man in a police uniform. I assume one of the two that were unlucky enough to be sent as the responders the night that I got the call. It took all the strength in me not to flinch as it's what were up until now stiff movements turned into a feral sprint accompanied by a reverberating inhuman growl. The moment that thing appeared through the doorway, Connor and Rebecca were swift to stab their shards into its body. Connor managed to slice into its abdomen while Rebecca jammed hers straight into its right eye. Moments later, the awful sound it somehow produced was cut like a TV turning off, and it began crackling until eventually shattering into pieces that littered the floor. The three of us looked at each other in disbelief. We had just killed one of those things, and without it even being able to reach us. For the first time, I felt strong, triumphant, like I was going to be the one that they should be afraid of. Well, that was short-lived. The only form of celebration that we were able to have was momentary looks of widened eyes and smiles before the sounds returned. The footsteps, the screaming, the static. So many sets of footsteps, so much static. Rebecca yelped and Connor held his free hand up to his ear and shut his eyes tight while I backed away from the counter. In that moment of fear, I forgot about the broken window. Before I could see what was about to come through the door, I was pulled back by my hair so hard that for a second I thought my scalp was about to rip. I could only keep myself on my feet for less than 2 seconds, calling out for help before my spine slammed against the bottom of the window frame. And I went limp just long enough to be pulled into the bedroom it was looking into and thrown across half its length, rolling across the floor. I could hear the commotion in the kitchen the whole time. Rebecca screamed while Connor was silent, but I could hear objects being thrown into the walls and an occasional grunt that I assumed came from him. I did my best to stand up as quickly as possible, and that's when I realized my glass shard was gone. Likely I had dropped it when I was grabbed. I opened my eyes to instantly be met with the sight of the other Marielle standing a few feet away from me with her mouth opened impossibly, revealing her entire bottom row of teeth but no tongue. And her eyes were 2 different colors, just like Connor had told me. She produced the same horrifying scream, but it wasn't mixed with any static. It sounded exactly like me, but as if I was being brutally torn apart, like I was being tortured in the most awful of ways possible. Looking around the bedroom, I realized there was nothing that I could use as a weapon. And by the time I did, the other Marielle had started her charge at me again, and I screamed, barely managing to slip past her and throw myself onto the bed. I reached for the pillow and through horrified, panicked inhales and exhales, I threw it at her, which as you may imagine was not a very effective weapon, and I crawled back, gasping as I fell over at the other side. Standing up as fast as I could, I was met with the awful sight of her crawling onto the bed like a spider. But that was not what disturbed me the most. Her head and mouth still hanging open so painfully and eyes empty like a dark abyss. Her head was throwing itself into impossible angles just like that thing pretending to be Connor had been doing while I was hiding. I tried to make my way to the other corner of the room, but she pounced on me, pinning me to the ground with inhuman strength, and she gripped my neck and lifted me up, slamming me into the wall. And as I looked into her, parts of her skin started going black. While I was still running, I heard the sound of glass shattering through the window. When the other Marielle had pinned me, I heard Connor shouting and a chair suddenly hit my double and it released its grip on me. That moment allowed me to look into the kitchen and see Connor being attacked by his double and disappearing out of sight. And Rebecca was held against the wall by another creature in the skin of a police officer, but her hand was raised and she was holding her glass shard still. All she had to do was drive it into its head and she would have freed herself. But the thing was too fast and it stopped her arm mid-air with its own, squeezing so hard it caused her to drop the shard and scream in pain. All of this happening in less than a second, and then it dropped her arm and put its palm against her mouth. What I witnessed after that was the total disappearance of that thing's everything. It was just a totally black silhouette that resembled a human, with impossibly uneven proportions, constantly swapping. But the only thing that stayed consistent was the arm with which it held onto Rebecca's mouth. Its palm then moved from just covering her mouth to grabbing her entire head, and she let out a guttural scream that only got louder and louder as it tightened its grip. I couldn't see anything more as I still had the other me to deal with. While looking into the kitchen, an idea came to me. I could lure this Marielle towards the window and use its pieces of glass to shatter her. And that's what I did. I sprinted as fast as I could to the window and turned back to see that she was already running for me. Her hands were out trying to grab me and I ducked right before she was able to and moved to the right, causing her to ram in front of the window and into its frames. It was now or never. I turned around and gathered all the strength that I had left to grab the other Marielle's head and slam it into the sharp piece of glass pointing right up. She was able to release one final shriek before it pierced into her left eye, and she stood there frozen and silent. At that moment, I looked up to see what was happening inside the kitchen, and I saw that Rebecca had completely disappeared, while Connor was still in a tussle with his double. I was about to crawl through the window back to help before I was forced down on the floor by an awful throbbing pain in my ankle, hand, and now neck, where the other Marielle had held me up. But the pain was soon to disappear, and I looked back up towards the window where my double was beginning to crack, and I called out for Connor one last time before she turned to pieces, and my memories end there. What I remember immediately after was waking up in a hospital bed with an IV going into my left hand, and I was covered by a sheet. I was so exhausted that I could barely produce any sound that alerted a visitor I didn't know I had sitting on a chair by the bed. "Easy, Marielle." The voice was that of a woman, and it would certainly have made me scream if I had the strength for it. "You've been out the longest out of us three." I slowly turned my head to see Rebecca smiling at me, with this expression that had something off about it, but I choked it up to condition. "Rebecca, what happened?" "We did what we had to do is what happened, but you were completely out of it when we came out." I was too worried about Connor to ask what she had meant by "came out." I was definitely in need of a memory refresher. "Where is Connor? Is he okay?" "Oh yes, honey, don't worry about him. He's in the neighboring room. You two had a real struggle in there." She then stood up, and at that moment, I could not remember how she had suddenly disappeared while we were in that place. She made her way to the door and opened it, stepping out. "You'll have to ask the nurses if you can see him though." "Wait, Rebecca," I called out weakly. Is it over?" "I'll tell you later, Marielle. Visiting time is over and I need to feed Toby, you know. He's probably starving by now. You know how much Frenchies eat." Before I could question her more, she shut the door and I was left alone. For the first time, completely alone and separated from Connor since he had offered me his help. I was afraid for him and I wanted to see him, but at least I had Rebecca's word that he was okay. I moved the covers to look at my hand and ankle. The parts where I had been marked were covered in bandages, and I had no idea what was under there. And when I ran my other hand over the front of my neck, I confirmed that the case was the same with it too. I was sure that if they had remained like that, I had a lot of explaining to do, and I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it, but I had the chance to finally rest and I wasn't about to say no to it. Not long after, a male nurse entered my room with a tray of food and smiled under his mask. "Hello, miss. I was told that you were awake. You were in quite the condition when we got to you. It was a stroke of luck your neighbors saw you before you had lost too much blood." "Blood? What happened to me?" I recalled the black marks again and ran my hand over the bandages on my neck. "You had some really deep wounds where the bandages are, and your neighbor's son saw you passed out on the driveway bleeding. Poor kid, but he saved your life." "Is Connor here? Can I see him? He was with me." The nurse looked at me confused and scratched his head. "Ma'am, there is nobody else with you, and we don't have a patient by that name in the ward." I raised my eyebrows and felt myself begin to tense. "That's impossible. He was with me. Check again, please. I was with two other people, that lady and Connor. Please, check again." "Okay, ma'am, okay. Don't stress yourself out, please. You really need to rest and keep yourself steady. I'll be back in a few moments." He smiled and nodded at me before turning around and leaving the room, but I was too nervous for pleasantries right now. I started to wonder why Rebecca was in such a rush and why she would lie about Connor if he wasn't here. I had remembered by now how she suddenly went missing while I was still inside that place, but I thought that just like how I had returned to the real world after I had killed the other me, the same thing must have happened to her. But there wasn't another her, right? That's when I replayed our conversation over a few times in my head before she left, and I kept stopping at one detail in particular. Was I misremembering it? Or did she get the name of her dog wrong? McCory, Rain, Big Country Allen, Meat Gasher, Smiling Cat, Jerry Ramey, Die Screaming, Nelson Asada, Malcolm Black. I had my first out-of-body experience when I was 4 years old. I remember having a vivid dream that took place inside my bedroom, and then suddenly halfway waking up and seeing my own body from above as I floated in the air of the dark room. Having no idea what was happening, I screamed and I kept screaming until I could finally hear my own cries that forced me awake. This began to happen again and again more frequently, and my parents had gone from comforting me every night to becoming worried and sometimes annoyed. I took medication that riddled me of what they saw as night terrors, and I was then weaned off of the pills by the time that I was 6. My OBE started up again, but I was older then and not as frightened. Before long, I was teaching myself how to control it. I could float around my bedroom and it was fun. I mean, it beat the hell out of any regular old dreams, and sometimes even the lucid ones, which I am also no stranger to. I soon began to expand my territory. I couldn't touch or interact with anything while outside of my body, so my options for nightly entertainment in my room were limited. Floating through the toy chest and seeing the insides of my stuffed animals was only fun for so long, and so I trained my strange superpower and increased its range. After a month or so of trying, I was able to explore the rest of our house. I could watch late-night television with my parents without them ever knowing, although I had no say in what channel was on. Nights they watched HBO or one of their R-rated movies were the best. The sound was always limited in a projected state. Voices were muffled like people were speaking underwater. But luckily for me, my mom was hard of hearing, so she always watched TV with the captions on, which benefited my viewing experience during my nightly escapades. It also had me reading at a high school grade level by age 8. I think I kind of assumed at first that everybody had my ability, that it was part of what it meant to be human. But after I brought up how I flew around the house at breakfast a couple of times, they just told me that it sounded like a fun dream. I realized that I really could do something special. Sometimes I would even use it to spy on my dad when he wrote his stories late at night on his computer in his office. I always found it funny how mad he could get when programs weren't working, or he couldn't figure something out. He also had some interesting midnight snack recipes. He was a cool dad all around. For example, when I was 7, in the summer of 1996, he took me to see Independence Day. Looking back, I was probably a little too young for all the destruction and alien violence, but there was always one set piece that interested me, which I looked forward to seeing each time the movie was on TV or playing from a well-worn VHS tape. With the title that I've given this story, you can probably see where I'm going with this. It was the Area 51 stuff in the film that stuck with me the most. I was fascinated by the movie's creators' designs and ideas about what the secretive military base looked like. Actually, when I was young, I thought that they had filmed those scenes inside the real place, like they had gotten special access to some big underground extraterrestrial workshop right out of science fiction. I later rationalized that they just knew what the place looked like and recreated it. It wasn't until I was 9 did I comprehend that they completely had made it up. That realization both disappointed and fascinated me. I had to know what was really down there, how it ran, what experiments they might have been running, what kind of people worked there, and of course, whether or not they actually had aliens or their technology locked up in some secretive warehouse in the middle of a desert. By the time that I was 10 and our house had internet access, I was gulping up the classic conspiracy theories about the base, going from one GeoCities or Angel Fire site to the next, and eating up every doctored image of alien autopsies and examinations of UFOs that I could find. Games like Half-Life and its Black Mesa compound, or Perfect Dark's take on Area 51, or the titular arcade shooter itself all scratched an itch. But I knew when I was young just what I wanted to do with my special power. I would cheat the system, I would bypass all of that security without anybody ever knowing, without ever having to join the military just to maybe get a shot at seeing the place. I mean, could you blame me? If you could do what I can, wouldn't you try? I wasn't even that far away. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. Las Vegas was just a day trip, and the ranch, as it's sometimes called, wasn't far past that. Area 51, a legendary producer of American lore, was always just past the horizon while I came of age, and one day I would see it. The problem was that I would have to practice every night if I could. The range of my astral projection was my weakness, and I would have to self-train myself to extend it. It wasn't like I could just consult with a mentor or look up out-of-body experience tips and tricks on the internet. When I was in middle school, I learned how some Native American tribes sent their adolescents on vision quests, a spiritual journey involving fasting and praying that, allegedly, sometimes resulted in the sensation of leaving one's body. Elsewhere in the world, various drugs could supposedly trigger out-of-body experiences. None of these things were an option for me, either to learn from or enhance my natural ability. I tried to avoid any drugs entirely. They only inhibit my skill. Even taking an Advil before bed makes the projection muddled and weak. The only way that I could get better was by exercising strenuously. I took naps whenever I could, meditated often, and taught myself how to lucid dream every night. Anything to master my inner self. By the time that I was 14, I was sometimes getting 12 hours of sleep a day, excessive even for a teenager. Over time, the boundary increased. The dark edges of the astral realm, which I could not breach, expanded outward. My neighborhood became my playground. I would go to bed early whenever my body allowed it, giving me time to float about and observe these secret lives of our neighbors before everybody else went to bed. You can call me a weirdo, I wouldn't blame you, but I'm also not going to share what I've seen or name names. My curiosity and its rewards are for me alone. Suffice to say, though, humans are strange. When the veneer that we all put on for the public fades away for the day and we stop being a side character in others' lives, our true selves come out. Turns out every family or couple has its problems, those familiar arguments and little debates. We all have our peculiar hobbies and preferred subject matter that we look up online late at night when we think that no one else is watching. But I'm not judging. If you lived in Flagstaff while I did, well, I apologize in advance for the fact that I may have spied on you for a bit at one point or another. Rest assured, though, your secrets are safe with me. I'm not going to say anything about anyone. I enjoy cheating the laws of the universe and observe without physically being there, but that's no excuse to start gossip. That said, though, I admit that I was no angel. I was a teenage guy for a few years of my life, and sometimes when I took a sick day in high school, I did have a few ghostly visits to the girls' locker room. Before you scold me, let me at least say that I was more fascinated by my astral range at that point than the things that I saw in the gym without others knowing. That wasn't the only exploring that I did at my high school. I would go there night after night, up and down its dark hallways. How often do you get to be at your school at night? The few times you were, it was probably for some event where all the lights were on. There are fewer things more unnatural in this world than seeing your school in darkness. The shouts and bickering of its loud students, not even a lingering whisper in the air. I often heard things when I visited, but they weren't audible. Rather, they were auditory hallucinations, the trick of a mind, even projected, caused by empty liminal space. And don't forget, whatever I could actually hear would be muffled, so I could tell the difference. I never saw any ghosts or demons or extra-dimensional beings while in a projected state, and I did look. Every now and then I could have sworn another person sensed my presence or looked right at me, and in these instances I would always freeze up for a second. But it was just a coincidence each time, based on my position as I watched them. What attracted their attention was something on TV, their cat making a noise, the wind on their curtains. I have never been seen. I don't think it's possible. I've even paid a visit to every psychic in town as they supposedly connected a customer with a deceased loved one to no effect. They were either all frauds or just not very good at their profession. By the time that I was out of state and in college, I had a firmer grasp on the reality of everything, including the banality of the place that I had longed to one day break into. I had accepted by then that, in all likelihood, Area 51 was little more than a secretive military installation where prototype aircraft were housed and flown, warehouses of spy planes and bombers, many of which were never mass-produced. Maybe it really did have its share of government secrets, but I no longer really believed that it had something more exotic, like aliens and their flying saucers. Life had disenchanted me to the point where I believe the Roswell incident really was just a weather balloon. Apologies to my childhood hero, Fox Mulder, but I no longer really cared about believing. And then my dad died in my sophomore year. Having focused on schoolwork and a smaller, more chaotic sleep schedule, I hadn't expanded my projection range all throughout college, and the students in my dorm were all so predictable that spying on them got boring. They played video games, got high, sometimes even did their schoolwork and ignored calls from their parents. But once I came home for winter break to attend the funeral and spend some time with my mom, I got back into my nightly jaunts. It was sort of my way of grieving through reliving my youth and remembering how much fun I could have as I simultaneously laid in bed and explored the town. And truthfully, I was also hoping to somehow find my dad lingering about in that other realm. It was a sudden heart attack that took him out of my life, and I figured that if anybody had unfinished business and a reason to cling on to the world of the living, it would be him. But he never showed up. I regretted not telling him my secret back then, thinking that if he had known, maybe he would have tried to speak to me when I was floating around the house, halfway between the corporeal world and whatever is next for us, if there is anything at all. Looking back, there was no logic to my regrets. I was simply coping in my own way. I was, however, awakened to the idea of mortality and how limited our time could really be. And so I made a promise to fulfill the wish of my younger self and see that secretive place out in the desert before I died, and perhaps spent the rest of eternity drifting around the world. And by that point, I wouldn't have a body to return to and no ability to tell all of you what big secrets that I might have uncovered. And certainly if Area 51 did turn out to be a disappointment, there were so many other places that I could check out that most humans would never see. I could visit the bunker under the White House, or get within inches of the radioactive molten slag that made up the elephant's foot under the Chernobyl power plant. I could swim around in an active volcano, see the inside of a famous dead person's coffin, count the money in a major bank's vault, and peer into safety deposit boxes, and make bizarre finds throughout a self-storage building. Some of those things I had already done, actually, not that there is much of interest to see in the region. I spent a night in Vegas once though, going around its casinos and seeing the security rooms and offices of the owners was one of my highlights by that point. But I'm still trying to figure out some way to cheat at the games without getting my kneecaps broken in the process. After college, I spent a few more years refining my techniques and learning how to send my meditative energy farther and farther outward. When I first had discovered my power, I was restricted to my bedroom. By high school, I could go a few miles out. By college graduation, I was able to get 20 miles away from my body. But the farther that I got out, the more mentally exhausted I would be when I returned to my physical self, and the less time that I had to project. I can move quickly when I explore, much faster than I can when I'm stuck inside my muscle and bone. I've learned to catapult myself through the air to get around long distances. It's not quite as good as flying, but it isn't a bad accomplishment for an amateur without a teacher. Those big jumps are a necessity for extended projection. I can't wake up unless I return to my body. That's the scariest aspect of what I can do. There have been times where I feel like I just barely made it back before a piece of myself faded away. And the thought of what might happen if I didn't return before running out of spiritual fuel or whatever you want to call it has always been the one thing that's kept me from taking bigger risks. Area 51 would be my toughest challenge yet, just because of the distance that I would have to cover. I had given some thought to the possibility that the secretive airbase might have some sort of detector able to spot me. It didn't seem likely, but in a world where there are pictures of pretty much everything, the fact that seemingly no one had ever leaked photos from deep inside the place made it enigmatic, like it was detached from the rest of reality. Once I put my mind back to it, I began to obsess about getting inside, just to see it. I had to see what was inside, if only to put a compulsive curiosity to rest. And then a meme made me move up my schedule. In 2019, a group of a few hundred people showed up to raid Area 51. Out of the thousands that originally planned to participate, their proclaimed goal was to see them aliens, and that they couldn't all be denied the chance. But of course, it turned out to be little more than a party near the base with only a few arrests. It wasn't that I was worried about them getting inside and messing things up or causing the military staff to trigger some self-destruct safety measure. I just didn't want them to book up all the nearby rooms. By then, I had gotten my range up to about 30 miles and I wasn't sure if I could do better, as it simply felt like my upper limit. But if I stayed at Rachel, Nevada, which was around that far north of the base, I could make it work. I reserved a room in the small desert town's motel for an entire week, which was probably one of the longest stays that they had ever seen, and to call it a town was a stretch. The place isn't much more than a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. It had no restaurants outside of the motel, so many of my meals would come from the combination gas station and general store. I wasn't expecting to be able to fully explore the base in a single night, but I didn't think that it would be so huge that I wouldn't be able to cover it within my time frame. I went to bed as early as I could my first night at the alien-themed motel, barely able to contain my excitement about the upcoming spiritual break-in. Astral projection, for me at least, is best commenced in a lucid dream state. I can pull it off at limited distances in time while meditating, and I used to randomly experience it throughout the night, perceiving it as a regular dream where I just explored my surroundings. But lucid dreaming was the way to do it right, where I could redirect all of my unused physical energy into my formless and wandering self. All the while I slept comfortably in a warm bed elsewhere. But the first night was actually a disappointment. I got there fine, going south and flinging myself across a bald mountain where I looked down at the lights of the base itself. Crossing the exterior fence was exciting. Traversing the enclosed desert around the buildings was thrilling. I kept expecting to be surrounded by helicopters and commandos any second, but there I was, strolling right into one of the most fortified places in the world. The problem was I just couldn't figure out where to go to get into the sublevels. Everyone knew Area 51 as a basement, even without paying a visit, but they didn't make it easy to find a way down. I didn't want to spend too long looking for nothing other than an elevator, just in case something happened and I lost my only chance to see anything at all of actual interest. And so I relegated myself to exploring the aircraft hangars and the administrative offices. I had done a few trial runs on less secretive air bases, and on the surface, the homey airport area wasn't all that different from the norm. I saw soldiers on patrol, staff making phone calls, people eating in a mess hall or working on computers, vending machines, furniture, bathrooms, and locker rooms attached to exercise areas. Everything that one would expect to see. It wasn't all that surprising. Area 51 isn't even blurred out on Google Maps. Anything truly meant to be kept away from prying eyes would be out of view of any passing satellite. The hangars I saw only held standard fighter or surveillance aircraft, including a few models from the past. I even saw one of the first American jet fighters in good condition, an F-86, the kind used way back in the Korean War. Couldn't tell you why they were keeping it airworthy. The only element that I couldn't fully explore other than the data on the local servers were the contents of the file cabinets spread across several of the offices and officer quarters. I just have no way to see what's on papers that are pressed together inside of a cabinet, so physical information wasn't only protected from possible hackers, it also keeps away the prying eyes of projectionists as well. I could have waited around for someone to open a file and read it as I peeked alongside them, but I kept my interest on covering ground instead. Honestly, I'm not a big aircraft or military enthusiast. I'm sure there are a million people out there who would have been fascinated with exploring the surface freely like I did, but it wasn't enough to make all the effort and planning worth it. I would have to try again on a second night. But if I couldn't find a way down after 3 attempts, I figured I'd be ready to head home disappointed. You may be thinking that I could just dip myself down into the ground and keep going until I emerged into an alien autopsy room or a dark energy reactor. Well, the thing is, dropping beneath solid ground isn't easy. It's slow and navigation is impossible as I can no longer see anything. I have little sense of orientation or gravity when I project, so if I get disoriented, I could get turned around and end up burrowing towards the center of the earth and never returning to my body. It wasn't something that I was about to try. I was restricted to elevators, just like the locals who somehow managed to get assigned to the place. On my second night, I finished exploring these surface buildings and focused my attention on getting down into the abyss below. It occurred to me that such a secretive base had no reason to make the elevators easy to find. I scoured the insides of walls looking for hidden rooms, but every building I revisited had no apparent means to gain access to the good stuff. A new idea didn't occur to me until I was halfway back to my body as dawn's first light swept the sky. I would have to wait another day to try it. The hangars. Area 51 was primarily used as a place to test out new aircraft in secrecy. That was what it was originally built to do, in a way that kept anything spying in the sky from catching a glimpse. There had to be at least one hangar, or maybe a few of them, that connected directly to the underground, to let them manufacture their prototypes down below and bring them up for their test flights. What I had seen so far must have been just the tip of a big iceberg. Thankfully, my third night of exploration provided the breakthrough that I was waiting for. I went into one of the empty hangars, and despite no indication whether or not there was something beneath it, I lowered myself through the floor. After passing through about a meter of metal supports, I emerged into an enormous elevator shaft with dozens of lights built into its walls. The hangar was big enough on its own, but here was a whole pneumatic lift system that could raise or lower the entire floor of a structure designed to hold aircraft. It was my first clue that a megastructure lurked under the airport, and I went down about 50 feet until arriving at the bottom. A construction bay was just ahead, and some half-completed modern stealth aircraft occupied its space. Eventually, if they even planned on completing it, it would be wheeled onto the elevator and brought to the surface. But for now, the place was otherwise empty, with no tools or blueprints in sight. The flying wing-style aircraft was in a dull, military gray color, and its cockpit was empty of any controls. I could have studied the thing all night, even if I wasn't all that invested in aircraft development. Instead, I moved on and began navigating the labyrinthine halls of a realm so few would ever get to see. Large concrete arches held up natural rock, excavated and drilled perhaps decades ago. Forklifts and inactive floodlights lingered in the halls, which were dimly lit up by orange sodium vapor lamps and fluorescent tubes. I didn't see anybody at all in this part of the base. By the end of the night, I had realized that the first sub-level was barely any more remarkable than the surface. Other than being an impressive engineering feat, it seemed like an area with its glory days long behind it. It had dozens of vacant offices, sealed locker rooms, empty vending machines, and only a few uniformed base staff walked past me my whole visit. I looked through more hangars along with storage rooms filled with old experimental aircraft that might have never seen the light of day and now sat frozen in time under a tarp. I also found some sort of conference room that, for whatever reason, had been buried behind a concrete barrier. It still had its tables and chairs, which were right out of the 1960s and positioned like people had fled the room in a hurry. For some reason, the room was still lit by a single dim wall light. The conference room turned out to be the most interesting thing that I saw that night, just because of its mystery and any lack of context. The first sub-level seemed to be seldom used. Maybe it sprang to life when a new contract for experimental aircraft arrived, and I had just shown up during the slow season. But I ended up spending the night wandering empty rooms and hallways, mostly looking for a way farther down. It was a massive complex that I knew I didn't cover completely, and had no particular desire to continue exploring, because my gut told me that it would be more of the same. Even so, I ended the night on another high note. Around dawn, I finally found a more active portion of the level that was lit more brightly and featured up-to-date rooms with modern computers and furniture. It was a small section overall, filled with a few dozen on-duty men and women. My lip reads told me that they were mostly just talking about current events. The discovery of the area led me to the central elevator that had eluded me, which required keycards. I slipped past the doors, the floater lift itself, and looked at the buttons to see that I had 3 more levels to check out. As the sun rose, I flew up the elevator to see where it had been hiding. I emerged into a hardened concrete bunker-like building. I passed through a blast door and drifted along into a lengthy tunnel on the other side until I was under the sky again, and at a secondary checkpoint deeper inside the base. The entrance to the lower levels had been concealed within a mountainside, and the tunnel leading to it was buried at the end of a narrow valley, a good distance from the other surface buildings. It was both hard to see and well defended. I did my best to memorize the location and returned to my body once again, ready to spend another day doing almost nothing as I waited to sleep and travel once more. My next visit, I knew, was going to be a special one. I had stocked up on microwavable meals upon arriving in Rachel and rarely left my room, leaving the curtains drawn at all times. I knew that I was messing around in a place that I was never meant to see, that the government worked hard to keep a secret. So naturally, I had grown paranoid that feds or the military would somehow track me down and come banging on the door. I hadn't really felt that fear since I first started exploring as a kid, back when I thought the cops of all people would show up and arrest my younger self for some sort of privacy invasion crimes. I never really rationalized how they might find me. But if anybody in the world could detect and find me, there was a good chance it might be the fine folks who have a career in Area 51. I just couldn't work out how they would either, because there were too many unknowns about what they were capable of and what they researched. If they, for example, had at some point reverse engineered alien technology, then who knows what manner of physics they were aware of that the rest of us may never understand. While projecting, I was sending some piece of myself out into the world, something tangible if difficult to detect. I was receiving information and then sending it back to my brain for processing. I just happened to never have found anybody that could tell me how I did what I did, what kind of signals that I might have been broadcasting that somebody or something else could perceive. The fear of being caught had always dogged me. It wasn't so much the consequences that scared me as it was finding out that there existed a way to find or catch me in such a vulnerable state. This time, that worry was also manifesting itself in a perhaps rather crazy concern that Area 51 had a honeypot set up in part of its base that would attract people like me and capture our projected selves for imprisonment and experimentation. I started thinking that I would stumble upon a room full of other trapped souls who got too curious. It felt like the perfect twist ending to my story. I could never see myself as the first one to truly have access to astral projection. I always assumed that somebody had done it before and there were hundreds of people like me, if not more. And if that were true, then surely somebody had paid a visit to a mysterious installation in an American desert. And if that were true, said installation might have already created countermeasures. Or I could just be overthinking and over-worrying again. That was a constant consequence of living a lonely life. I have stress feedback loops in my head that have sometimes led to panic attacks, but that's never been a problem while projecting. I guess that's one reason it usually makes me feel so peaceful. By the fourth night, all of my good food was gone and the motel TV was no longer providing any entertainment. Exploring the base was all that I had to look forward to, and I wanted to make the most of it. As soon as I could, I jumped straight to the main elevator and floated my way down to the second sublevel. This one was where the trains ran. Area 51 had been long rumored to have an underground rail system, though there were debates if it was just for local use or if it connected to more distant bases, or hidden entrances or cargo depots. The level was almost entirely pure cave and drilled away some time ago by large machines. Flatbeds ran on electric rail, transporting material and aircraft parts across the installation. There were few rooms to speak of, and the cars moved without human operators until they had reached their terminus, where they were unloaded and moved by people who looked like they might have spent weeks at a time without seeing sunlight. I couldn't be certain if it was always this busy on the level, or if there was some big project in the works that required a constant transport of goods, but it was definitely active down there, with cars coming and going constantly. The tunnels were maze-like and sprawling, and with little signage, it was pretty easy to get lost. I must have spent around 2 hours just trying to find something more interesting than the extensive rail line itself. After I unintentionally doubled back to the elevator, I chose to take it down again instead of spending further time attempting to navigate the local subway system. The third sublevel was much smaller than the first and looked entirely different. Its corridors were narrow, confining, and featured more metal than concrete or natural rock. It was reminiscent of the interior of a nuclear submarine, and most of the few people I saw walking around wore suits and ties. And those that didn't were armed guards, which was strange. What were they protecting or trying to keep inside this far down? Aliens, I hoped. Seeing a living colony of little gray guys would have made this trip more than worth it, and I couldn't wait to describe them to the world, whether or not anybody believes any part of my story. but there was something weird and concerning about the floor. For one, I could no longer pass through the walls. I could push my way through some of the metal siding, but something inside of the wall had stopped me. Nor could I get through the bulkhead-style doors if they were closed, which severely limited my ability to explore the floor. I was able to get a peek inside a room when somebody went into or left one on them occasionally, but they were always closed again, like there was a protocol. If I had gone into any room, I would probably end up trapped inside it. It was a risk that I couldn't take. What little I did see of the offices and labs on this floor didn't suggest that aliens have ever been kept there. Not that I had high expectations. The fact that I couldn't go through the walls, or the floor and ceiling for that matter, was something new to me. There must have been a sort of energy field inside them, maybe there to block something else, some kind of signal. And by extension, they limited my mobility in the process. Seeing the sub-level as a dangerous place to linger, I returned to the elevator and dropped downward to the fourth and presumably lowest level. Only I descended into darkness and something solid. I was already on the bottom floor, at least that the elevator had serviced. Either they filled the space below with concrete to seal it off, or there never was another sub-level, and the button in the lift was just a dummy for whatever reason. I went back to looking through the third level's hallways to see if I had missed anything. The old hanging wall clocks inside showed me that it was 3 in the morning, so I still had a few more hours before my body would start trying to wake up and ask where its owner was at. I had the idea that the floor below, if it existed, might still be accessible somewhere else. Passing hallway after hallway and going down each side of an intersection, I got a closer look at the weapons in the hand of each patrolling guard whenever I got a chance. They didn't seem like any sort of gun that I was familiar with. They actually looked non-lethal, and their barrels were equipped with a panel of lights that surrounded some sort of beam emitter. They had the appearance of a sci-fi laser rifle, but logic told me that they were likely deterrent weapons, which may have fired off bright bursts of light into powerful laser, or burning microwave energy. It made no sense. If somebody managed to get all the way down here after dodging all the real bullets up above, why give the guards at the heart of the base rifles like this? Unless, as I speculated already, they were keeping something inside, and these were the only weapons that could contain it. Eventually, I noticed something lining the segments where the hallways were connected by seams and rivets. Every few meters were thin strips of metal and LED lights that ran along the wall, floor, and ceiling. I didn't think much of them at first, thinking that they were a part of a peculiar emergency light system. At least until I randomly set one of them off. The moment I did so was one of the scariest moments of my life so far. I can't really explain why I only triggered one of the apparent sensors long after I began traversing the level. At the time, all I could think about was how anything in the world would be able to pick up my presence. The LEDs lit up in a pulsing red to attract attention, and my dampened hearing just barely picked up an alarm. It was all so bizarre and new to me that I froze up and just floated there, feeling exposed and helpless. Guards rushed in like they were trained to do, despite how rarely, if ever, this sort of thing happened. They couldn't see me, but they swept their weapons about like they were searching, and some of the men had what appeared to be scanners on their wrists. They were trying to find something invisible, like a ghost. I would say that it was absurd, but I'm someone who can send my own spirit out into the world. The existence of ghosts was never a big leap for me. The younger guys soon looked a little less nervous about what they were doing, and one of the older ones deactivated the alarm as the whole group continued searching. I was still too freaked out to focus much on their lip movements, but it was obvious that this was a major event for them. They looked at the other hall sensors to see if any of the other ones were going off, and one of the men swept his scanner right over my position. Reflexively, I held my non-existent breath as I did so. but he didn't seem to pick up anything. I kept still and watched the entirety of the procedures they followed. The situation was called in over radio and the men finished their scans and began to disperse, except for the one guy who waited for a technician to show up who then checked the sensor for a malfunction. The tech even plugged in a wire into a port near the sensor and ran some software checks on a tiny portable computer. I only started moving again once the IT guy had finished up and left. All in total, the delay in my abundance of caution had cost me about an hour. I would have to return to my body soon. But first, I convinced myself to press on ahead even after what seemed to be my detection. Now wary of the sensors every time that I passed one, I stayed calm as if to keep my astral energy output low and continued down a long hallway that ended up at a promising large chamber. It was the most secured place that I had seen yet. A circular room with only 2 exits and covered by multiple security cameras and automated weaponry. The turrets in the same non-lethal design as the things the guards were armed with. Ahead of me was a large segmented blast door painted orange and black, with the faded numbers 01 painted on its stainless steel surface. Like the rest of the floor, I couldn't pass through the barrier, and I already really wanted to find out what was on the other side. It probably held whatever the guards were keeping down here and worried about, I'm sure. But it didn't matter. I wanted in. For my journey all the way out here and its risks to be worth it, I needed to get in. I waited for as long as I could on the off chance that somebody would open it, but I had to return to the surface once I felt the connection to my body beginning to wane. I returned to it just as it was waking up, a lust in my gut to see just what the base's biggest mystery might have been. And getting past that door was already my new obsession. It was like the Area 51 of Area 51. My childhood dream reignited. I would never get answers from anybody in the world, and the odds of finding out what was inside by peeking at any visible papers or computer screens throughout the base seemed non-existent. I had seen a lifetime share of an incredibly exclusive place, and of course, because of human nature, I still had to see that final secret. The 5th day was agonizing, not just because of the wait to get back onto the base. It was also when Area 51 raiders started showing up. There might have only been a few hundred that actually went through with it, coming out to the desert to party, get drunk, and live out their alien rescue fantasies. But the motel, my sanctuary, filled up with rowdy out-of-towners, while camper van and motorcycle engines ruined the quiet atmosphere. All day I thought about the door and what was behind it. A new super advanced aircraft, a deconstructed alien starship, the skeletal remains of an ancient god. I would have accepted an empty warehouse, as long as I found out for certain and didn't go through the rest of my life not knowing. I had no idea what was driving my urges, only that I wanted to see something truly special before heading home, and so far I felt that I hadn't. After hours of television and internet browsing just to pass the time, all while staying inside my room to avoid social contact, I grew unreasonably excited to see the sunset light hit my room's window. By 8 p.m., I was already in bed and trying to force myself to sleep. Since I couldn't take a sleeping aid and my new neighbors were rude and noisy, it was torturous. I wouldn't wake up before my sleeping cycle was complete once I was out of my body. But getting there was no easy task, and it took 2 hours of restless tossing and turning. After all that, the night was a bust. I explored very little else of the base instead, spending most of my time in that final chamber with the giant door, just waiting for somebody to come along and open it. I understood that in all likelihood nobody would have a need to while I was at the base. I just didn't want to go home thinking that I missed a potential chance because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. In hindsight, I wish that I had seen more of the base while I had the chance instead of wasting all my time in one place hoping for the impossible. I returned to my body disappointed, and then suffered through a 6-day, my time at the motel running out. I could extend my stay, but I felt that would just lead to more extensions to feed an obsession, and I had to get out of that nowhere town. My mom called me, as did my employer, both of them wondering when I would come back. Responsibilities at home were putting pressure on me to finish my time in Nevada, and my room's air conditioning was now just barely working, and a repair guy wouldn't be coming anytime soon. I was miserable, but I had to stay just a little longer. I almost spent the night dreaming instead, just to escape from reality for a while. I had never projected for 6 nights in a row, so I only ever saw the reprieve of darkness during the few naps that I had over the week. And then nobody showed up to open that door for me again. Every time that I was about to leave that security room to explore more of the base, I convinced myself that somebody was on their way to let me through, but it never happened. 10 hours I spent lingering on that sublevel that I could only barely navigate. Hell, I even tried sending psychic waves to the people down there in an effort to manipulate them into unlocking that door. It didn't work though. I woke up early in the morning sweating and feeling pissed off. I knocked on my walls and yelled at the people next door to turn down their music. After they told me to shut up, I left my room, packed up some water and food, and drove off. I might have been able to tolerate the desert and the heat for one more day, but not that motel room where I felt like I was losing my mind. I actually ended up driving down to Vegas and spending the day on the strip and blowing money on tourist shows. It worked so far as to let me get my mind off of things, calm down and detox from the shut-in routine that I had reduced myself to. And getting some actual meals at real restaurants helped as well. But still, I never wanted to come back to Nevada again. I arrived back in Rachel around sunset feeling refreshed, and instead of heading to my room, I went to the party, or rather, observed it from afar. The drunk and eccentric types looked like they were having more fun than I had over the past week. They were gathered up at the gate and just hanging out as base guards made sure they stayed back and didn't try to run inside. The raiders were smart enough to not get shot, although as I said earlier, I did see a few of them get arrested. Their fun lasted into the night, even if they sadly never got a chance to see any aliens. But if that didn't disappoint them, I figured I shouldn't have let myself feel disappointed either. I had actually seen the inside of the base. Unlike any of those guys, I had fulfilled a childhood dream. I could head home right then, look back at all this in a year, and still feel excited about everything that I had witnessed inside of Area 51. But that would never be good enough for me, so instead, I drove my car to a secluded area near the base, reclined the seat, covered all the windows, and fell asleep. If I projected this close to the place, everything would be in sharper focus, giving me a better experience, and I could cut back on the travel time from and back to my body. I was determined to leave the state on a high note. Once I was adrift, I floated over to the party by the main gate and went right by the revelers, and then past the guards that stopped them from going any further. If only they could see me and cheer as they watched just another regular dude making his way inside the base. I've made fun of them, but I would slowly start to see the guys as a good luck charm as the night progressed. Before I even arrived at the elevator, I saw something new and worth following. 2 people in full hazmat suits with tinted visors that hid their faces came walking out of one of the side rooms within the mountain tunnel. They were pushing a cart with a large metal crate on top. Even if they had nothing to do with that final door, I wanted to find out what they were up to, so I tagged along without them knowing. They went through all the checkpoints and didn't stop to chat with anyone as others moved aside from them in the hallways. I steadily realized that they were heading down the same route that I took to get to the locked door. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but I was looking more and more like the 2 were my ticket inside. By the time the 3 of us were heading across the lower sublevel together, I tried my hardest to contain my excitement, which was the only thing that I could think of to avoid setting off any alarms again. The hazmat boys nearly broke my heart the moment they made a right at the last junction before the door. But it turned out that they were only having their key cards programmed in a surveillance room. It was filled with camera feeds on a TV array and had a single guard watching them all, including the 4 cameras pointed at the big door. It must have had codes that changed daily as an extra layer of security. Once their keys were updated, we arrived at the last obstacle. They ran their cards onto 2 separate scanners, pressed down 2 red buttons with their thumbs, and then finally pulled the 2 levers within the door itself. Maybe this was something they did on a weekly basis, or it could have been an annual thing and I had just gotten extremely lucky. Whatever the case, the huge slab of metal at long last began to slide open to reveal the darkness beyond. Lights flickered to life past the door, illuminating an angled concrete corridor and the hefty inclined cargo elevator that went down. The hazmat team went in and locked their cart's wheel into a pair of mounts on the left, which didn't start moving until the big door was closed again. I was still right there with them and was now committed, having no way out until they left first. The elevator went downward at a tepid pace and I stayed with my 2 new best friends instead of going on ahead with them. I had come this far, so I was willing to be patient a little longer. I was heading down into the inner sanctum of Area 51, a forbidden place that very few would ever think about, much less see for themselves. The ride lasted 10 minutes or more and it felt like we descended deep into the earth. If there ever was a portal to hell or another dimension, it would be here. After the lift came to a stop, a second giant door opened as slowly as the first, revealing something perplexing but not quite bizarre just yet. Ahead of me was a purely stone antechamber carved into bedrock. The surfaces were immaculately smooth. About 30 feet of rock illuminated only by the elevator corridor's light led up to a perfectly large proportioned open square that preceded a void of darkness. The square was roughly 40 feet long on each side, so it was certainly a sizable doorway to whatever lay beyond it. It wasn't completely without technology or machinery. The opening was lined with these same sensor strips used on the 3rd floor, and there were large, circular hatches built into the stone on either side of the door. I stepped out into the antechamber with the hazmat crew as they wheeled out their cargo, and they looked to my sides. On the left was an old regular-sized metal door that showed signs of disrepair. While my buddies worked to unlock their crate and remove its contents, I went over to get a better look at the old side door. It appeared to lead to the original 4th sublevel, or whatever remained of it. It was unpowered and had no inner electrical field running, so I was able to pass through it and see if there was anything on the other side. But I saw only darkness, nothing at all. On further inspection, I noticed that the door had actually been jammed open just a crack. From outside, I managed to see a tiny bit of the pile of rocks that had blocked my view. It appeared that the hallway had suffered a cave-in at some point, or maybe the entire floor had gone through a controlled demolition. Whatever happened, it seemed to be completely inaccessible. I returned to the hazmat brothers as they worked together to take out their cargo. It was a giant battery or a power cell of some kind. I understood what they were doing, replacing one of the 2 power sources that kept something in, past or around the giant square entrance running. But they couldn't just hot swap one of the batteries that easily. It looked like they had to shut the whole thing down first. On realizing this, I felt equally terrified and excited. I knew that I might actually have a chance to glimpse what they were keeping all the way down here. The guys went to either side of the door, opened up 2 fuse box looking things above the battery hatches, and they flicked 2 of the switches. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and then the lights slowly began to warm up past the doorway. The first thing I noticed was just how many of them there were, high up on a ceiling inside the chamber. There was an entire array like stadium lighting turned to a face-down position. It was overkill for illuminating a room. One of the hazmat guys worked to exchange the power cell, while the other took up a defensive position near the center of the doorway and pointed his rifle into the brightening room past it. I will never be able to give a reason behind the place that I saw. I don't think I'd be able to rationalize it even if whoever ran the base sat me down and described it in great detail. Kept deep inside of Area 51 was a full-size lobby of a grand hotel, its style copying the architecture of the 1920s. And the more that I looked at it, the more it seemed to be pulled out of history. It wasn't like a movie set or an attempt at a replica. It had Roman pillars, marble tile, a mahogany reception desk with a classic candlestick phone in black. Most of the hard materials were in good condition, but the fabric, like the red carpet and the drapes covering the walls, were falling apart and covered in dust. Behind the cloth hanging from the ceiling were the remnants of floral wallpaper, curled and melting into the floor. It was like the lobby had been sliced cleanly out of a building and transported directly here. The outer edges of the walls looked sharp. Without any signage, it was difficult to tell where it had come from, but it did certainly look like it had served wealthy clientele in a major American city a century ago. And now here it was, a hotel lobby out of time and place. Something unimaginably evil might have happened inside its walls in the distant past, or it could have simply been haunted or cursed. Other possibilities I thought of upon seeing it were that the very matter of the structure had been corrupted, and it was contained here to contain the spread, or that maybe it really had just been transported from the past through some wormhole experiment gone wrong. Drawn to the large room and not really thinking about it, I drifted forward and through the open-air doorway. I met resistance on my way inside, yet I pushed through with minimal effort. There was something about the room that made these guys contain it, fear it, and point their weapons at it. But I figured that whatever it was, it couldn't hurt me. I would just take a quick look around, and when they finished changing the batteries for the lights, I would leave with them. Every little detail of the hotel, from the counter's brass call bell to the yellowed mail envelopes that would eternally wait for the recipients and looked like they would fall apart if touched. It was all too authentic to be a part of a recreation. It was also in good enough condition to suggest that the place had been moved here a long time ago and preserved as if it were in a museum. Whether it had been perfectly rebuilt brick by brick or somehow brought here instantly, my untrained eye was unable to tell. At full brightness, the lights above also completely bathed and drenched the lobby, and probably made the heat unbearable as well if I could feel it. I could have spent the rest of the night thinking about the purpose, history, and storage costs of the hotel lobby, or just exploring it, but I didn't want to linger at the deep end of a containment chamber. I turned to leave, drifting back to the massive entrance, and with my luck, I only almost made it. I didn't realize that I was trapped at first. I thought nothing of the fact that one of the hazmat guys had fully inserted the other battery, shut and locked the hatch, and hit a lever to draw power from it. In my mind, they were only there to keep the lights going. It turned out that they'd actually powered an invisible barrier within the square doorway. It was the same kind of field within the metal walls above that kept me from going through them, and my dumbass had just gotten stuck inside the hotel lobby crypt. The two finished up with their task, packing up the discharged battery into the crate and wheeling it away and back to the left. I shouted at them as best as I could, but of course they would never hear me. I hit the barrier with my ghostly fists, hoping to cause a reaction that would alert them to my presence. That was also to no effect. I felt a brief glimmer of hope when they turned around and walked back to the sides of the doorway, but they only did so to turn off the powerful lights. The lamps didn't go dark instantly. The hundreds of bulbs above me had a dim afterglow that would linger for a few minutes, giving the lobby a few lit candles worth of illumination. But I knew that I would soon be trapped in darkness for at least a week or at most years, all while my body rotted away in my car far above the surface, where it would be cooked by the sun. So that was it. I had gotten myself killed. Or maybe I would go on even without a body, trapped down here for centuries outside of a physical form. I thought about all the places that I would never get to see, and my poor mom wondering what had happened to me. The only two people who could let me out disappeared behind the elevator door, after which I drifted over to the center of the hotel lobby, feeling completely despondent and resigned. The fading warmth of the lights looked like they would keep me out of total darkness for another few minutes. I didn't want to think about my fate or how long I might consciously be down in that place before everything faded away. I had never failed to return to my body before. There could have been some chance that I would just wake up and be fine, but I couldn't see that happening, especially now while I was in a chamber seemingly made to contain the same force that I had tapped into to project myself. The lights dimmed further. I could barely see anything. Colors had left the lobby and there was only faint dark shapes. I knew that pure darkness awaited me and never anything else. A piece of me would be trapped here forever. But then a voice spoke to me. I swear, for the first time in my projected form, I heard a voice directed towards me and it came in clearly. I see you. It said in a deep, disjointed English, from somewhere in the abyssal dark. Then what manner of thing would you be? I wasn't alone after all. I didn't dare move, I was so scared. It felt like my spectral form had begun to lose coherence and break apart. If I was in my body, I would be feeling a heart pound through my chest, or falling into a daze or panic. But in my state, true terror could only diminish my ability to remain an existing and thinking being. I had never come closer to experiencing a degree of fear that could have that effect. The entity that produced the voice grew closer and whispered into my ear from behind. I do think I have been here long enough. Perhaps you are a means toward freedom. Just before the light was replaced by blackness, I saw and felt something pierce straight through where my spine and heart would be. Long pale fingers twisted around and curled upward, reaching for my spectral eyes. The skeletal appendages were like spider legs and ended in sharpened claws. It wasn't a ghost or a demon or a powerful psychic alien that had been down here for a long time and had wasted away. It was something else entirely, and I'll never know for certain just what. Its presence was ripping apart the link to my body. It said one last thing. Now bring me to you. I felt an incredible burning sensation tear through me. The next thing I could remember was suddenly waking up in my motel room, on the floor and tangled up in my blanket with my shoes still on. It was 11 in the morning, the last hour of my stay. Somehow I had escaped from the prison, returned to my body, and made it all the way back to the motel. I looked out of my window and saw my car, messily parked across 2 spaces and scuffed up, like I had driven back while intoxicated. I packed and checked out within 10 minutes, not even changing my clothes. And then I drove straight out of Nevada without stopping. I expected the police or military to chase after me or set up roadblocks, but the highway was just about empty all the way to the border. No one knew that I had gone into that prison cell or anywhere at all in the base. When I finally got home, I ate a microwave meal, turned off all the lights in my apartment, silenced my phone, and slept for about 14 hours. I was only calm enough the next morning to start to actually process what I had been through, and I began writing it all down. My long sleep had been dreamless, but I didn't think much of it at the time. During the day, I started to feel tired much earlier, and I suffered through a murky brain fog. like I was disassociating with myself, making my already boring job harder to get through. That got better over time, but I lost two things permanently as a consequence of my mistakes. It's been years and I still haven't had a single dream since then. I go to bed and then I wake up. It's like no time has passed for me. In relation to that ailment, I can no longer astral project either. A part of myself is gone. A year ago, I got my brain scanned at a hospital. It didn't reveal what was wrong with me or help me find a treatment, but I did learn that all of the parts of my gray matter that have anything to do with dreaming were much more active than average, even though I wasn't actually dreaming anymore. I think that whatever I encountered have freed me, but also found a way back to my body as a payment for that freedom, took up residence somewhere in my mind. That entity now gets 8 hours or more a night to come out and do whatever potentially evil, demented deeds it wants. It doesn't speak to me or share visions of its motives, but I have no reason to think it's benevolent. The people working in Area 51 tried to contain it, and they even knew how to detect it and maybe subdue it with light and other forms of energy. At least until I came along and gave it a way out. I survived and do what I can to keep others safe, including locking my bedroom door with a key each night to keep myself from sleepwalking, or leaving the house in some dangerous, possessed state. But I don't think physical manipulation is what it's after, or maybe I'm an imperfect vessel for the entity and it's out there each night looking for another. There's a chance my actions have hurt somebody you know, and for that I sincerely apologize. I'll soon be moving to one of the country's most rural areas, but I'm not sure yet if I can find a house that's 30 miles away from another innocent person. I'll accept a solitary life with no dreaming if I have to, but I need some time to track down a suitable place to live. Until then, I'll stay on the road so that no single cluster of people has to experience the terror I carry, and with any luck, no pattern will be found and no suspicion falls upon me. I may be able to stop all of this if I ended my life, or if I turned myself in at Area 51, but I'm sorry. I'm still too selfish and cowardly to do either. And for my mom's sake and my friends, I can't stay close to home. You see, every night, 1 or 2 people within a 30-mile radius of me die from a sudden brain hemorrhage. The local news picked it up and called it a possible local epidemic, and that's when I made the connection and blamed myself. I've been on the move since. I turned myself into a walking bioweapon, and my only remaining hope is that if you should have the misfortune to meet the thing I'm carrying around, any possible pain or terror you experience is brief. Again, I'm sorry, it's a terrible mistake to squander a gift. Worse still, to misuse it.